Mm-hmm.
Hey there, welcome to Critical African Thinkers. This is a place where nothing escapes scrutiny. Here we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain that which is factual and logically consistent. So today we're going to be having a discussion in a conversation on dealing with trauma in the Black community and seeking mental help for Black people. Because I do believe that there are scars. Somehow, I believe that people carry scars from their experiences, and not the least Black people as well, either from experiences from the past or experiences that they're currently facing. And one of the ways in which I believe people can deal with such experiences, especially with emotional trauma, is to seek help, is to seek psychological help, to seek the help of a professional. So I want to explore these concepts. I want to explore these solutions. I want to look at this problem today with someone who I believe has the experience to talk on this issue, who has hands-on experience, who have dealt with something like this in the recent past and currently. So today, my principal guest would be Lakia Queen. So before I open up the conversation, before we start, I would just like to say a little, give a little background about my guest today. So, Alekia studied literature at UCSC with an emphasis in world literature, cultural studies, and feminist studies, with an emphasis in law, politics, and social change. Former project administrator at New Teacher Center and administrative assistant at UCSC Women's Center. She also held a place as the vice chair for the Santa Cruz Commission for Prevention of Violence Against Women. She's a mother and longtime resident of Santa Cruz. Lydia has shared her gifts and insights with the Santa Cruz community for many years. She strives to connect with and touch the hearts and minds of everyone she comes in contact with, to share stories with others from all walks of life and with different cultural perspectives to find the common thread that connects.
Wow, what a great introduction. Are you there?
Hello,
Yes, I can hear
can
you
you?
now.
Okay, okay, you couldn't hear me before.
No, it somehow the sound went away.
Okay,
But,
okay.
but we're okay.
All right. So I was trying to read from my phone, so I think that's why it got cut off. Anyway, Lekia has been working as a psychotherapist trainee for the past 6 years, and she has dealt with people with minor to severe mental issues. So she has a lot of experience in talking about this thing. So, Lekia, welcome to the conversation. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, and wow, thank you so much. And thanks for that beautiful presentation. Um, yeah, I'm doing well. I'm really happy to be here to have these conversations about Black mental health across the diaspora.
That's good. That's good. That's good. So, I've been fascinated by trauma somewhat because I believe that human beings we somewhat live with us vestiges of the experiences that we've had, either from the experiences that people share with us or those that we've experienced ourselves. So I want us to explore the concept of trauma. What exactly in your understanding is trauma? When you say something is traumatic, this is a traumatic experience. What exactly is that in your understanding?
So I want to read from what is it, the American Psychological Association, how they define trauma. Okay, and then we can kind of elaborate a little bit on that definition. So the American Psychological Association defines trauma as an emotional response to a terrible event, something like a rape or something life threatening. Just that has lasting adverse effects on an individual's functioning, emotionally, mentally, physically, um, socially, and on someone's spiritual well being. Um, so, these traumas, when these things happen to people, it's very difficult for them to come back from them. Not, I won't say that that is true for everyone, and we'll talk about cases where, you know, people have been able to kind of, regain, their sense of self and identity, and kind of overcome and move through those traumas. But for a lot of us, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice, and sometimes it does take the support of a professional person like a therapist or psychiatrist. So yeah, that's essentially like the definition and how I define trauma. But of course, it's such an expansive term, and but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay, so thank you for that definition and introduction. So basically, it's an emotional response to maybe sort of noxious stimuli in the environment from unpleasant experiences. So our bodies respond in an emotional way. Did I get that correctly?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay,
Hmm.
okay, okay. So trauma, in terms of trauma, are there different types of trauma, or it's just an emotional response? Are there categories of trauma that people can go through? Are there severity? Can you sort of break down trauma into the different aspects that one might come across?
Yeah. Well, I think that any form of trauma is severe. People can experience trauma both directly and indirectly. Indirectly meaning vicariously. So if you grew up in a home where there was domestic violence, right? Or if you saw a friend get hurt due to some kind of community violence, or if you witness, a robbery and someone getting, maybe shot or something like that. So that's kind of vicarious. And I wouldn't say that that was minor trauma, right? But it would be minor to something, like you actually getting shot or having, been beat or being a victim, or I would say survivor of domestic violence. So you ask, like, what are the various types? There's so many, but I do have a short list of them. And so here I have, there's trauma from physical abuse, sexual abuse. There's medical trauma. There's trauma from sex trafficking, terrorism, and violence. There's trauma from death, right? There's trauma grief from death. People can experience trauma from natural disasters. There are complex traumas, um, and there's PTSD, which is post traumatic stress syndrome. Um, and so, yeah, and you can even incur trauma from bullying, right? So, those are just a few examples of the ways in which trauma shows up in different spaces.
Okay. So if there's one particular thing I took from this is that um, you don't have to be the recipient of an unpleasant experience itself for you to be traumatized by it, for you to develop an sort of an emotional response to it. If someone close to you has gone through that experience, it is very possible that you yourself could develop some traumas to it, right?
That's correct. Hmm.
Okay. Now, I know very well that it is no news. It is not a new thing um, to say that Black people have been traumatized throughout history and even currently in different climes, in different ages, in different states. The focus of today's topic really is to explore Black trauma and to see how we can heal ourselves of whatever it is that has traumatized people, Black people in the past or currently, and to look for strategies to actually deal with them. Because the conversation should be more focused around how do we get solutions to these problems? How do we solve these issues? Um, if people are broken psychologically, they cannot function at their full capacity. They can't function at their best. So they're going to be suboptimal. They're going to be um, the results are going to be suboptimal. But we want the best for the Black community. I personally want the best for the Black community because I believe that we can achieve so much more than we are achieving right now. But before we get into that, um, can you describe some of the traumas that Black people have had to go through? And I want you to break this into two sections. I know there are past traumas which a lot of people know from history and all that. We can name a few from the tip of our fingers, but I'm not going to go into that. So we're going to talk about that. Mm, And you're going to also talk about the present traumas, for people like us who are not in America, who are in Africa and some of the, it's easy for us to look at the issues that happen to Black people in America and sort of want to dismiss it because we do not have first-hand experiences. But at times I always ask myself, uh, isn't there no merit to the claims that many African Americans make when they say we're being discriminated against? There's racism. Isn't there no merit to that? Aren't they being traumatized by such discriminations? So I want you to break this into two. What are
Mhm.
some of the past traumas that Black people have gone through and the current traumas that they are going through? So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so you've definitely mentioned some of those past traumas. And this is another one of those kind of really vast topics. So I will try to, speak to the issues that I think are important to me now, in the current moment. But yeah, we definitely suffered slavery in the United States, right? And Jim Crow, and those are kind of the traumas that we generally hear, like a lot of our political figures, professors, social media, and things like that. Those are the traumas that we kind of hear about on a day to day basis, and I think those are valid. Those definitely are part of the conversation. Yet when I think about, trauma across, like, Black people and the diaspora, I just think about even my own like personal experiences that let's stick with historical trauma. So when I think about historical trauma, I kind of have to look not only at what happened to Black people in the US, but I also have to look at what happened to Black people prior to coming to the US, right? Like, when I think about historical traumas, I mean, Black people were enslaved by, uh, like the Arabs, right? Black people were also enslaved by other Black people on the continent and sold, which is how, we kind of got into slavery and got dispersed out through the world. Um, and I those are the things that I think about, and like I have an awareness about, but they're not necessarily things that I choose to focus my attention on, because I'm not really sure that those things are affecting me directly, my day-to-day life experience. Sure, I do have, I meet some people with terrible attitudes, both Black and white, right? I have had, I would say, some racist experiences throughout my life here in the U.S. And I've seen, Black people suffer so many other traumas in different countries. But like I said, it's very difficult for me to just think about it in like a black and white terms, or I guess the American version of slavery, without kind of bringing into conversation all those other, you know, years and generations of trauma and things that Black people experienced prior to that. So, like I said, I tend not to look at that, and I look kind of like, what's going on now? How are we being affected now? And you know, just kind of looking at the statistics, we are the highest murdered population here in the United States. Um, and we have the highest cases of unsolved murders. We have highest cases of violence in our communities, and those are direct things that we're experiencing now, here in the United States and then also abroad. Um, when I lived abroad in Italy, and I also lived abroad in Cambodia for a little while, and I remember like seeing some of the experiences, some of the I guess migrants that had come from different parts of Africa, specifically Ghana, Nigeria, in some parts of Kenya, Uganda. And I remember like a lot of my sisters and brothers being, locked up in prison, um, directly for, I don't know, either, just not having a passport up into selling, illegal substances. And, it's, I've even seen like in Italy, like people just trying to make an everyday living selling, basically like vagabonds, being chased down the road and thrown into jail, just for trying to make a living. So, and as for Black people here, I would say, you know, we do experience a lot of trauma, but it's very difficult for me to think about like, or racism. And it's very difficult for me to think about in terms of like, systemic racism, other than, yes, we are underrepresented in a lot of so careers and even education and all of that and those things here. But, um, I've come from a lot of those communities and definitely are connected to, a lot of Black communities. I'm originally from Savannah, Georgia, and it's a place where there's like, I would say, there's a huge percent of the young male population that are in prison because of different violent crimes. I'm a survivor of one of those violent crimes, and so I have a very different relationship to, like understanding, that kind of, I guess, showing up in that way or just having that experience. And so, um, I know I would say that most of the things that I have incurred, as far as things that have really affected my life deeply, are connected to my own community and how, I've experienced, violence is from my own community, like family and, community members, or, things like that. So I hope I'm not rambling. There's so many ideas that I want to share about this, but yeah, that's, I mean, if you can kind of redirect me as far as like
Okay.
what you were having me ask specifically, answer specifically.
Okay. So let me just push back a little bit for I think the last statement you made that most of the negative experiences you've gotten are usually from people in your own community and family members. But one can say that that's a question of proximity because you are around people of your own community,
Mhm.
presumably more Black people, and you're around your family. So who do you expect to get shit from? Do you expect to get it from people that you rarely come in contact with? So how is that? How is that unique?
Well, it's unique because I'm actually not only in I would say the last 20 years of my life I've lived in California, both San Diego and Santa Cruz, and you know um, the California population is predominantly white and Latino, and like I said, I have had some very uncomfortable experiences in universities and, in, let's even say like a grocery store or something like that. But it hasn't been uh, it hasn't impacted me so negatively that I feel like I'm, oppressed and I can't, you know, create the type of life that I want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Hmm.
So,
I will say that one. Can you go ahead?
no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I will say one experience that I'll share this with you, that I would say have negatively impacted me and emotionally and also academically, was with a professor and a TA. And, I went through so much to, like, in terms of, connecting with student affairs, writing letters, using a lot of time to raise awareness about my experience. I'm really happy that I had those avenues to be able to do that. And eventually those problems were solved. It took me like a year or something like that. And it was, it was dramatic in ways. It was overwhelming. And like I said, it took a lot of my time, but I was able to get some results from it and some resolve. And that is maybe the harshest experience that I've had, I would say, in the past 20 years of my life, with someone from the white race, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it had to do with school. It had to do with schooling specifically. This challenge you're talking about that you
Yeah.
had to deal with from a white person.
And it was essentially I was being undergraded, and frankly, just given really low grades. And the truth was that person was either not checking my work, which I don't think the case was, or they were being racist, or they just I'm not really sure, because I didn't have a conversation with that person. And so I had to go to so many ropes to prove that these were not my grades, and I actually earned higher grades. And I, initially contacted the professor of that particular class, and they, you know, denied that that was happening to me. And so then I had to later go to student affairs and just go through the ranks of the university to get the grade resolved. And so that was my experience. I know that's a lot of people's experience. That happened with a white professor and TA, and it also happened with a Latino professor as well. Um, and I had to go through the very same process. I just said that to say that that is the worst experience I've had, um,
Mm,
you know, in the past, like, I wouldn't even say 20 years, like past 10 years with a white
mm,
person.
mm,
And, and yeah, it did affect my life, but not in a way that makes me feel like, it's, I can't get anywhere. I can't, move on with my life. I'm being held behind. I just don't have that feeling, is what I'm saying. And that's not my experience.
Okay, so the interesting thing to note there is that despite the fact that he was victimizing you, you were able to get redress and you were able to get it within reasonable time. So that's sort of a plus. It means that um, this is the point I've always tried to make when people speak about systemic racism. I don't think there's anything like that, or if at all. I think it is individuals who are racist carrying out their racist activities. I mean, in this case, you could pinpoint someone specifically doing something to you. You understand, in terms
Mhm.
of not giving you the appropriate grade. But then when you approached say the system was able to correct that anomaly. You get it?
Mhm.
But
Okay.
if it was true that there was systemic racism, then I don't think you should have been able to get a redress because somehow the system is built up to just suppress and oppress you. So definitely you are not going to. If a racist person was operating under that system, they're going to have all their way. But that has not been the case. But then let me still push back a little bit.
Mhm.
Now, you've given me an example of the racist incident that you have faced. And even though you say this is the worst that you faced in most of your life and it did not hold you back, don't
Right.
you think that it is kind of demoralizing for a lot of Black people if, for example, you've shared this story, someone you know shares a similar story, and people around you are sharing the same story? Don't you get frustrated that this country, this system is people, white people are actually trying to hold us down? Don't you get that feeling?
Oh yeah, I definitely get that feeling, that, and that is actually a message that is prevalent in, like I said, medias and university classrooms and um, different workshops, races, I guess awareness workshops, that racism awareness workshops that I've attended. So I would agree that that's the message. Hmm.
Okay. But in all of that, you were still able to forge a path for yourself. You never at any point had the notion that this racism you are facing was sufficient enough to hold you down if you are
Yeah.
determined to surmount it.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is empowerment, right? The feeling of, you're talking about the framework of empowerment and feeling empowered.
Mm,
And so, yes, I like I said, I don't deny that there are not barriers. It would make sense that it's going to be that way. It's like white people are 60% of the country, right? And they're the dominant, culture, dominant population, and so they
Mm,
are going to have advantages based on that. However, I feel like there, with along with barriers, there are pathways, right, up to
yeah,
ways to succeed. And so, what I would tell someone who is having a very similar experience that I have or have had is to look for those pathways. It's easy to focus on the barriers and what boundaries there are, but that is not a part of our the dominant conversation. Is like, how do we look through past those barriers or around them, right? How do we look for, of course, take inventory, know that, there's something going on, there's something wrong, I'm feeling oppressed, I'm feeling however I'm feeling. Yet, how do I access those resources, right? There are resources. I know that they're there. So how do I access them and utilize them to my advantage so I can get to where I want to go, right? On whatever journey we choose to go on.
so when I hear black people who make the position as though um, there's really no pathway, because you have said that there are pathways to surmount these challenges. Even if they are racist challenges, there are ways that you could walk around them.
Mm.
Why are some other black people thinking the exact opposite of the way you're thinking? Is it not possible that you are the exception, that you are the anomaly, and that um, you have just been exceptional in dealing with this, but most black people, the reality for them is different, is stark.
No, I don't think that I'm an exception. I do know that I have some advantages, but I don't think that I'm an exception. There, we can kind of look around at other communities that, had, transgressed, you know, um, like if we looked at, let's say, like Uganda, right? Remember the war between Uganda and Burundi and how terrible that was and how many lives have been lost. If you, um, I'm sorry, Rwanda, I meant Rwanda and Burundi. And you kind of look at Rwanda now, and it's like one of the fastest growing economies in Africa right now, right? Because they overcame, they had a vision, and they worked towards that vision together. The same thing with the Chinese, right? 30 years ago, China was a very poor country, right? They there was a lot of suffering, and there probably still is. I do know that I have friends there, and so I know that there's still a lot of trouble. But China is now on the world stage now, right? And they're have a strong economy, and they're creating millionaires every day as we speak. Another group of people. I mean, I look at myself. I look at people like you know Michelle Obama, or even some of the what is it? Some of the cultural figures and like our music figures, like I don't know, you name one. There's so many of them. So there's a lot of people I feel like that came from the same place that I've come from, and yet they have been able to achieve, the goals that they set out for themselves. So I don't think at all that I'm the exception. I will say that there's not a whole lot of conversation being had about these people, in public spaces, on social media or media, but I definitely think that they're around, they're out there. There's a lot of examples.
So so you mean to say that black excellence is not being heralded, is not being um, put in the mainstream, it's not being shown to the world that despite the challenges that black people are flourishing, that the media is sort of painting the message of misery as the reality for many African Americans, when the reverse is the case. You mean to say that?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay. Now, this brings me back to the point that you made earlier, that it's possible for you to be traumatized by an event that happened to someone close to you and did not directly happen to you. Uh, Now, when I ask a lot of the African Americans, as in, okay, so what are those specific challenges, racist challenges you are facing in America today? They never fail to mention redlining, and they never fail to mention Jim Crow. And
Mhm.
if my memory serves me right, that was decades ago. So is it possible that people, African Americans today, are sort of have learned to be traumatized by the events of the past? They have sort of absorbed the trauma of their ancestors, such that even though they are not currently experiencing it, those trauma by proxy, somehow they are affected psychologically and emotionally by such things in the past. So what do you have to say about that?
And yes, I do agree with you, but not totally, right? Because African Americans, they're not a monolith. There's so many different African Americans from different walks of life, right? Um, and I would say like the conversation around the oppression and suffering and being held back is generally, from my own experience again, because I can only speak from that. Generally, those conversations are being had with really educated Black people, people that are coming from the universities and professors and things like that. But I don't usually have these types of conversations with my friends who are not educated, formally educated, right, in university settings and things like that. Um, that those are not the conversations of like my family members necessarily, right? Um, so yeah, I and then you know, like I said earlier, there are barriers, but then I think about um, like the Jewish, right, and Jewish people and all the many years and generations of suffering and how they always manage to if someone is like denying them housing, then they go and they get money and create their own housing division, right? Then if they're denying them jobs in the banks, then they go in there create their own banks. um, I think we have learned to kind of focus on again those barriers, right, the things that are in our ways. But I think it's time for us to kind of put on a new set of lenses, like I said earlier, and start thinking about like, what are ways for me to overcome this barrier that's in front of me. Yeah, it's hard. I'm not gonna say it's easy. It's difficult, but it's possible. And so then, how do we begin to think about the possibilities?
Okay, so you mean to cite the Jewish case as an example of people who have gone through traumatic experiences and somehow they have come out um, better for it, and somehow they've been able to transcend those trauma and not be defined by them. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Um, the thing that's interesting to me is that before now, before the whole conversation was so focused on Black people, I used to think that you couldn't criticize Jewish people without being called anti-Semites. I mean, you couldn't say anything about Jewish people without being called an anti-Semite, which is almost like what is happening right now. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just defer to the Black person. Don't criticize them. But even though the Jews maintain that sort of privilege, they didn't just stop there. They actually they were material successes,
Yeah.
and these material successes were sort of heralded. They were the norm. They were sort of the norm in Jewish society. So I think that it's not it's not a bad thing for Black people to recognize the challenges that they face and sort of draw some sort of protection from what they've historically faced, but to just leave it at that, to let it just be at that point without pushing it further, without taking advantage of the fact that because of your history or because of your past, maybe some persons might just be a little bit much more cautious when dealing with you and may not be so hard on you. I mean, like in the Jewish case,
Mm-hmm.
and taking advantage of that and just running with it and getting something great. So that is my issue because I feel like the conversation gets stuck at that point where you now focus on what has what has happened to us. I mean, till today the Jews will still talk of the Holocaust,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't let it they don't let it hold them back. They're not going to say because of what happened to 6 million Jews in the 1930s, 1940s that we can't forge ahead now. I know I may not be making a direct comparison, but that is the sense that I'm getting. That's the sense. So, how do we deal with this kind of trauma? How do we um, how do we forge ahead from here? What are those specific things that we can do as Black people to deal with this kind of trauma that's sort of still stuck with us?
Um, you know, I can't speak for everyone as a whole and how they're going to deal with it, but how I have learned how to deal with it is through acceptance, right? Um, I accept that there are terrible things that have happened to my ancestors, both here in America and abroad prior to them coming to America. Um, I know that those things were wrong. I know that they suffered. Um, and I just accept that. But I also know that they were so resilient, right? They're so strong. Because if they weren't, I wouldn't be here today speaking with you. And so, I would just urge anyone who is feeling, deep pain or suffering or any type of attachment to these historical trauma to just exercise acceptance first. And then from there, we can begin to start having a conversation around, how do we, you know, hold an awareness for the past traumas and the present. How do we begin to heal? And then how do we begin to grow, right? I think that that is one way of dealing with it. Um, and yeah, we can talk a little bit more about like specifics later.
Okay, so you've given a general sense of yes, this is what we need to do, but it's not enough to just tell someone that well, your ancestors went through this. It's in the past. Pick yourself up and I mean these things are emotional. They are sort of written in our psyche. I
Mhm.
mean emotional scars are usually very deep and in many occasions you actually need an outside help. So of what use, of what good would it be to just tell a Black person in America right now that yes, we know you had terrible have your ancestors had it terrible in the past, but you don't have it. But there's a connection between yourself and your ancestors. So what specific things should you do?
Mhm.
What steps should you take, either from a professional, to help Black people deal with something like this?
Okay, so yeah, I don't believe in the pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That kind of ideology. Especially not being a therapist, because my work is centered around me being empathetic and kind of empathetic to people's experiences and their challenges, and to have compassion for them. And when I say that Black people in America are going to learn acceptance, I definitely don't mean that. I mean acceptance of the past, because there's nothing we can really do about that. We can't change that, right? Um, and then I would also, I guess, another thing I would say is to, and this one is more simplistic, but sounds like definitely needs to be said. Just maybe exercising more love, right? Showing more love for yourself, um, for those past oppressors, or those people that have caused harm in some way. Just exercising acceptance, showing love for them, and then more than that, yourself, right? And what does it look like to start loving yourself? So some ways we can start doing that is like you said earlier, you know, sitting down with a therapist and having someone witness your process of healing, right? Talking about those traumas with someone, a trained professional. Of course, just because they're trained doesn't mean that they're going to be, your person. Doesn't going to be the person that's going to help you through this process. You're going to have to determine whether this is someone who you feel connected to, right? Who you're comfortable communicating, your experiences and your challenges to. Um, so that's number one. You can start there. I've also more recently been thinking about like what does it look like to create like a healing community, you know, um, and so if you can think about community members that you feel connected to and that hold some sort of you know I would say ancient wisdom of our ancestors, um, people that also have their own healing abilities through, I don't know if it's music or dance or poetry writing, just spending some time with community members who are intentional also about healing. Um, that could be another way to do it. Um, Meditation is one that I use. I try to meditate every day at least 20 minutes, but the goal is 40. Been pretty busy, so I haven't been able to do that, but definitely doing like some internal work, right? Really like tapping into, that internal voice. Like what is going on there, or the internal quiet. So spending about 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night meditating. Um, and just kind of like a free flowing type of meditation. Not, your thoughts don't have to be connected to anything. It's just more of just having an awareness about the present moment and what that feels like. Um, so those are just three examples, but there's so many more. um,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you for those examples. I think they'll be very useful for anyone who takes advantage of them. I would soon open up the conversation for other people to call in to the conversation. Now you mentioned something about loving those um who are oppressing you and all that. And Bo sort of made a comment, love the oppressors with his eyes rolled up. Um, uh,
Mhm.
uh, there is I read somewhere that if someone wrongs you and you keep a grudge, you're not letting go, you're holding on to it. You every time you see the person, your stomach knots up, and you're angry all the time. Uh, that you're doing more damage to yourself than even to the person, because it's like having acid in your blood. So I think in that instance, what I believe you're trying to say is that for your own good, for your own mental health, for your own psychological and emotional health, that you should just let those things go. I mean, things that you actually have no control over. To
Mhm.
bear that sort of resentment towards people is not going to do you any good. It's not going to do you any good. Am I getting a sense of what you said there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you said it was like having acid in the blood. And it's not just like it, it actually is. There are some recent studies, you guys can do like a Google search where it is showing that, having hate in your heart or having feeling animosity or any of those negative feelings, they actually do affect us physically. Um, and a lot of, some of our terminal illnesses are linked to those very issues, like, of holding on to all that negative, energy and tension. So, yeah, what you said is right on. It's just, it's not, I'm not saying that uh, I didn't say what the love looked like, right? I didn't say to love your oppressors and go sit down and have dinner with people who are racist to you. I would, because I'm so open to hearing different opinions, and I'm open to not holding on to any sort of ideas about a person or being attached or having judgment. Just giving people space to just be who they want, because that's exactly what I want them to do for me. Um, so I'm not telling people to go down and have break bread with people, break bread with the KKK, or I don't know, whoever you've had the racist experience with. It's exactly what you said. Just letting go for the sake of your own well being, right? Yeah.
Okay. So, Lakia, thank you very, very much for the conversation so far. So I just posted the link for others to call into the conversation, and let's talk. Let's have a robust conversation. So Lakia has been taking us through so far with what trauma is, forms of trauma, how Black people have been traumatized both in the past and in the present, and what are those ways, what ways we could deal with that trauma and move on. And she has mentioned a whole lot of things that Black people can do. And one of them, which I'll still tie to this, is it's forgiveness. I mean, um, this lady, what's her name, that came on my channel the other time, she did a video on forgiveness. I mean, on
Mm-hmm.
how it would be beneficial to just forgive and uh, forgive and let go. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, you're not saying they should sit down. You should go and sit down with the racist person and have a beer with them, but their existence shouldn't be a bother to you. Their existence or their actions or their words or their feelings towards you shouldn't be so bothersome to you that it sort of cripples you emotionally. If that happens, then you're not getting the best out of life. If you go around with the mentality that you can't get ahead in life just because there's a system that is put in place to oppress you and to suppress you, I don't think that's a good way for anyone to go through life, because you gave an example of the challenges that you faced, and which uh, many people, including myself, would say, okay, that was actually a racist challenge, but
Mm-hmm.
you did not let it crumble you. You didn't let it defeat you. You kept fighting, and you got what you wanted. And it ties into human nature. Um, we are going to face challenges in life as human beings, whether male, female, black, white. And I'd like us to see, at times, to see these, in quote, racist attitudes of some white people towards you as one of those challenges of life that you can actually surmount. Challenges are meant to be surmounted. Challenges are meant to be dealt with. They're not meant to stop us, to stifle us, to just hold us back and not give us a way forward. So I think that's a great point that you've made so far in this conversation, and you have dealt with um, people who have had emotional issues, trauma, and all that. Can you give us like some specific examples of people you dealt with and how you were able to help them to come out of it?
Uh, yeah. So I am working with a few African American males. Um, One in particular is a very special case. He's the first African American male I work with this company that I'm working with now, and he has had, I would say, the most trauma of most Black males that I've met. He was born to a mother who was an addict. He was kind of shuffled around between his mother and father, between states, up until he was 4, which is when his father shot his uncle, or pulled out a gun in front of his uncle and tried to shoot him in front of him, and was sent to prison for like 8 or 10 years or something like that. So then he was sent back to another part of California and had to live with his maternal grandmother, who was nurturing and caring. She fed him and she clothed him, but she also demeaned him. and told him that he wasn't going to be anything and he was going to have a terrible life. And I know that she did that out of love, because we do that a lot of times out of in the Black community, is we, try to kind of scare our children into, we put fear in them, um, around failure, and we're hoping that that propels them to do better. And so I understand that, but it was very traumatizing for him. Um, and on top of that, um, his father later was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He never grew up with his mother. And through, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. And through all of that, he was able to graduate high school at the top of his class. Um, he got he played sports all the way up until high school. He was a star player. Um, he graduated the university a few years ago and now has an excellent job, and he's kind of doing some very similar work to what I'm doing. Um, I even though he got to that point where he was really successful, there were a lot of people and things along the way to help him um, get through his challenges. But we do the type of work we do together is mostly me witnessing his traumas, because he's never had a space to be able to talk about them. So I listen to him a lot, um, and then we do a lot of breath work. We do meditation. He has homework to go out and be in nature for a few hours. Um, as far as like working on the trauma, one of the ways we do that is just kind of through our psychodynamic, you know, talk therapy. I have also sent him to groups and things, that so he can go and speak with other Black men locally that may have share similar experiences or not, but just to be in community with, because he finds healing in that as well. Um, yeah, lots of exercise, right? But I think the more we talk and the more we work together, the more it comes up, and things that he had even suppressed for so long. And I feel like he has told me in the last year that we worked together that while my life has changed so much, I no longer feel depressed. I no longer want to be isolated from my friends and my family, right? Like I do feel like I can go out and I can be present at work, and I feel like I can be a part of this community at work without feeling like the the token Black male, right? We talked a lot about the stuff that you and I just talked about, like racism and all of that things, and all those things, and how he felt like they showed up in his workspace. But one of the things I talked to him about a lot was empowerment, right? Like, what are your strengths? How do you capitalize on those strengths, right? And how do you, like, when you are feeling like someone is doing something or oppressing you or saying, how do you approach that, instead of getting angry about it, which is an issue that he had and he came to me about. How do we change that anger to becoming more curious, right? Asking more questions, digging deeper, um, so that we can get down to like the true meaning of what is being said, and how it's getting translated. So those are some specific ways that I've worked with that client. Of course, everyone is different, but that's generally what I would do if I were working with someone who had similar experiences to him.
Thank you very much, Lakia. So we have Bodhi in the house and we have Marcos. Bo, how are you doing today?
Just to elaborate on my
Hello, Bo.
what can you hear me? Can
Yeah,
you hear
you're
me?
far. Yeah, I can hear you now. Where's Marcos? Marcos, please come back to the conversation. I'd like to
Um,
hear from you. So go ahead, Bo.
yeah, just to expound on the point that I made, I wanted to know to her, what does loving your oppressors mean, right? Because being ADOS and growing up Southern Baptist, I know how that looks historically, as far as the rhetoric and how it tends to manifest. But I'm wondering, what does she mean by loving your oppressor?
So yeah, what I said earlier was that I don't have necessarily a recipe for how that looks for everyone, right? Um, but what the my ultimate message was is to not hate, not to be angry, because that does not service you in any way possible, right? If you're, if you, what they teach us in psychology is that when you are angry, you activate your amygdala brain, right? That's kind of the flight or freeze brain. And so when you activate that part of your brain, the rest of your brain, the logical part of your brain, essentially shuts down, right? It doesn't function. And so there's no way possible for you to act rationally from that space, right? So, um, like I said, I don't expect people to go out and have dinner with people who have been racist to them, but I expect them to understand that that is a human being, right? They have their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own ways of being and showing up in the world, and that's theirs. And I accept them for who they are. I don't have to do anything with that. I can go on about my life and connect with people who, you know, are of a like mind and share similar interests. But I'm not going to give that, you know, negativity any energy at all. And I'll say this, that I have a daughter, and she used to kind of tell me about, oh, people are being racist, and because we grew up in Santa Cruz, and she's had some interesting experiences. And what I used to tell her is there's three ways you can feel about a person. You can really love them, and it's going to take a lot of energy from you. You can really hate them, and that's also going to take a lot of energy away from you. But if you don't care, that doesn't cost you anything, right? You can go on and continue to live your life in the way that you want to design it. So that's essentially what I meant by, just having love in your heart. I didn't direct it at any particular person, but just, being full of love. And
Um, so basically, ignore it. Don't.
um, what? Go ahead. Want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Um. Yeah, I'm saying. So what are you saying? Like ignore? No, I guess it was your use of words when you say loving your oppressors. So I take that as I took that as us as black people, right?
Hmm.
ADO, like African Americans specifically,
Yeah.
we've always been taught that, right? And been told that.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know, some people may feel as though we're a hateful people and we just hate white people, right? But if you just look at our community historically,
Hmm.
that's never been the case, right?
No.
Even if you look at the case with Dylan Roof,
Hmm.
the victims of that crime, the community came together and showed compassion and love and all that for him, even after it happened, right? And
Hmm.
you've seen that over and over, right? So it's kind of like we've been programmed to feel as though we should hate it, what we should love those that oppress us, right? Or
Hmm.
make a concerted effort to show love. Whereas I don't see the benefit in that, but I also don't see the benefit in allowing it to control you. So when you talk about like, I guess we're talking about the just the greater issue of mental health. Well, let
Hmm.
me ask this: is this about just the overall mental health aspect of African Americans, or is this like specifically about like mental health as it relates to the trauma in dealing with white people and the history in America? Because I feel as though mental health right now in 2021
Hmm.
has less to do with white people and that history of slavery and whatever than it does with other internal factors that we deal with in our everyday life, in our community and whatnot.
You're right about that. Mental health is never, I mean, I think it's more currently, more recently, starting to, look at issues around racism and oppression. But historically, yeah, mental health has not kind of, you know, delved into that. But um, I'm hearing what you're saying about, I think you're talking about Southern Baptists, and specifically it's there's a phrase in the Bible where it says love your enemies or something like that, or if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them and let them hit the other cheek.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, are you here?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Marcus, welcome to the conversation. How you
Oh,
doing?
yes. Yes, thank you for the lively discourse y'all are having.
Yeah. So we were having a back and forth on my on one of the videos I posted about this lady, Robin DiAngelo. But that's not the focus of our conversation today. So I believe you've been listening in to the conversation since maybe since we started. So what do you think? What do you think about this conversation? Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. I think it's important to address trauma and the different forms of trauma and the different ways that uh, trauma manifests itself in our behaviors, our thoughts, our actions, and how things move on. Um, I also think, though, that the psychological trauma of the things that in particular Black Americans face, it goes, I guess, it doesn't go unannounced, but it goes less acknowledged. um I mean, even things like just seeing a video, like a George Floyd video, for example. um those things not only cause that initial trauma of seeing a murder, an execution, a lynching happen on camera. By the way, a lynching that happened in 2020 and not in the 1930s, like some people would say, "Oh well, racism is over because we had a black president." Blah blah blah. But the trauma of seeing something like that is doubled, especially for an individual like myself who is past the age of 40, who has seen those things play out throughout the entirety of his life, including in his own personal life. I think um, that level of trauma is goes underappreciated, in the sense that some people say, well, why can't black Americans just move on? Why, these things, why, they happen, but you're still able, there's black millionaires and there's a black president and there's all of these things that are happening. So why can't you just move on and let your and how come your life can't progress because of, or how come your life, or how come you can't do the things that other individuals can do in this country? And I think that trauma, not only the psychic trauma of historical terrorism, but the current trauma of current terrorism, um, plays all into that. And I think that's what the whole reason we had a back and forth on your online, on the post with Robin DiAngelo. And just that's one of the things that I came on here, and in listening to this trauma talk, that I wanted to really highlight, because I think that's something that's minimalized, um, in order to uphold the system of white supremacy that says it's all about your individual actions, and everything that happens in your life is a product of your efforts. And I think that that psychological and psychic trauma that paralyzes individuals, some individuals, I think that goes overlooked.
Okay. Yeah, great point. I see where you're coming from. You see, the truth is, when I saw the video of George Floyd, I was angry too. And every time I see the video of an unarmed black person get killed, I get angry actually, because first of all, I'm a human being. Second of all, I'm a black person as well. So I wouldn't want to. I sort of relate to what that person is going through at that point. But when I put it in a larger context, I begin to see that, okay, this is an unfortunate thing that has happened. It should never have happened. But is it really because of the race of this person that this thing happened? I'm trying to get the name of this guy. There's this white guy who was killed almost exactly the same way that George Floyd was killed. And I
Da-
think Coleman mentions his name a lot.
yeah,
Which
Daniel. I think you're talking about Daniel Shaver. Somebody that was it the guy in the hotel room who was executed by a police officer.
there's one other
Well,
one. There's one
another
other one.
another another white
There's
kid got killed maybe like a month ago. Hunter Britton.
Oh
So
yes.
that, but well, did you have more to say?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
let me
Go
let me
ahead.
just finish. Now, when you see something like that, I mean, the one I was trying to find out happened years ago, but nobody knew anything about it. Presumably because maybe because it was a white guy, so the media could not really whip out anything out of it. But the police were basically laughing at this guy. They knelt on him. He was telling them that he couldn't breathe as well. They knelt on his back for minutes, and then when he passed out, they were joking on his body and hitting him like this guy just passed out. And when the paramedic came and saw the way they were treating him, and when he finally confirmed that the guy was dead, he was visibly angry at these police officers. So at times when I look at this and I put it in context and say, okay, may this just be bad policing tactics? May this just be excessive use of force by the police? Um, Maybe it's not racism. Maybe it's not because of the color of this person's skin. Maybe it's just bad police practice, or maybe it's just bad people doing bad things at that point in time. So that is what keeps me, that's what checks me from going overboard with my emotions, because definitely a black person being killed when it's not warranted would get to me as a black person myself. But I also try to contextualize it. So go ahead, Bob.
Let me say this, right? So when we talk about mental health, right, in this context, I believe that there's a concerted effort by the media and political elites, right, to manipulate the already mental illnesses that may exist within our community, right? So if you take George Floyd, for example, right, for a person that's already somewhat stable and, you know what I mean, not suffering from any forms of mental health, George Floyd would be looked at in a one-off way, right? Where as though it was something bad that happened and there's a need, and it was unfortunate, right? Not to downplay what happened, but it was unfortunate. But when you take the mental health aspect of it, it then bombarded into their psyche. You know what I mean? It takes on a whole new life. So I think a lot of this stuff that we go through, because a lot of stuff that you see now, I didn't suffer from when I was younger, right? Because we didn't have this 24-hour social media news feed loop of just oppression and police brutality all day. You know what I mean? That and I think that's affecting a lot of people nowadays, especially people if you don't who already is on the on the on the fence, right? Like Carter G. Woodson had a quote, right, where he said the thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies. You know what I'm saying? And the oppressor always indoctrinated the weak with his interpretation of the crimes of the strong. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what you see with a lot of people that people, which is a form of mental health that people suffering from now, is that 24-hour loop of just being indoctrinated of the fact that you're inferior or you're impressed. You know what I'm saying? They give you nonstop. You know what I'm saying? Where when you see quotes like with the white kid that happened to him, that was unfortunate. The media didn't spin that into all white people are oppressed and you're oppressed and it's a police state and you have to rebel against the police, because that's really, at the end of the day, that's really what the topic of discussion should be, is police accountability and whether or not you want to live in a police state where the police have the, it's not really a racial issue, you know what I'm saying? But I feel like if you take, I don't know which one came first, the chicken or the egg, whether or not people are suffering from mental illness because of this constant news loop loop of negative news, or if it's causing people to get mental illnesses.
Wow, boy, both of you all said a lot of things that I'm quite frankly kind of shocked about. And I will say, Mr. Diddley, Bo Diddley here. I love your profile picture in living color. Is one of the treasures of the United States. I tell you, as far as media is concerned. And Charles, I think it's your name as the moderator. Um,
Yeah.
you would do yourself a great service to go online and look up In Living Color and watch some of those shows because they talk about race a lot too. Um, but based on what you all were saying, I wanted to address what Charles said first. The incident with the white male being killed in the same way as George Floyd being an unfortunate incident. But for every one of those instances, I I could probably give you 1,000. Well, maybe not 1,000. I'm being hyperbolic. I could give you off the top of my head just 10 that would be of specifically black males being mistreated and killed in the way that that one white male is. And the point that I'm making when I'm saying that is, if it's not race, if it's not about race, then why is it that the vast majority of murders of unarmed citizens are black? That would be a hypothetical question that maybe you can ponder on, and for Mr. Bo Diddley, for what you said about police training. Now that is true, but who is most likely to encounter instances with police? Again, it's black people. And is that because we are inherently criminal, or does that mean we are racially profiled more than other groups? Well, the evidence clearly shows, and it's clearly showed throughout the history of policing, that uh, black people in particular, and more specifically black males, are disproportionately profiled, harassed, detained uh, by police, and that's been the
But
case for
what
200
you're
years.
saying, okay, let me ask you this, right? So what you said is that you can name more black cases, right? But
Yes, sir.
that doesn't mean that more black cases happen. It just means that the media shed the light on more instances of black men being killed. Where if you look at deaths by police, you know what I mean? There were more instances of white people being killed by police.
Not unarmed white people, and also it stands to reason that there would be more deaths, white deaths by police, because they have 6 times as many people, or 5 times now as many
Right,
people as blacks. And
right.
also, I would mention that um, the media definitely propagates and overblows the issue of police brutality against blacks. That's not a question either. But it's important to recognize that overblowing that and promoting that is contributing to the black trauma, the psychological trauma of blacks. Because I mean, and you sound to be an individual that's around my age or older. I'll be 48 in September.
Well, I'm
You,
younger than you, but not
oh,
too.
you, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Um, I said that too because of the level of maturity with which you're speaking. So I apologize if that was offensive. But if you've lived in this country long enough as a black male, chances are you've experienced some of that level of discrimination at the hands
Right.
of law
I,
of,
I,
at the
I I've
hands of
got
law
I've
enforcement.
gotten my ass kicked by the police before.
Yeah. So it
Right.
stands to reason if you've experienced it personally, and then you've seen it on television, and then all of the people or a lot of the people that you talk to have also experienced it, because I in three
Yeah,
separate occasions.
but
Yeah.
I wasn't a quiet boy though back in my younger days.
Oh, so it was so the beating that you got from police. Are you saying that it was justified?
It's part of the game. I say it was part of the game.
What game? The game of white supremacy. And
No, no,
or
the game of just being young and dumb and thinking you tough. You know what I mean?
okay, so you provoked the beating, is what you're telling me.
I sure didn't help my situation. I'll say that.
So would you say that their beating of you, the amount of it, and the beating in general was warranted?
I didn't complain afterwards. You know, I didn't go home and
You're not
complain
answering.
about it
See, and
because
this is
I know where I stood at, and I know, you know, and like I say, you know, at some point, you know, it becomes a part of the game. You know what I mean? So you can't
mm,
really cry and play the victim if you know the role you played in it, right? And you know
what?
it was avoidable. So
Okay,
it was an avoidable situation, but that I fed into, and which
okay.
resulted in me getting my ass kicked.
So
But
are you okay? Go ahead.
and here's the caveat: it was a
Hmm.
black police officer that kicked my ass.
Yeah. Well, now black people can be white supremacists also. So
Right.
I think that's important to note. But
So
uh,
you
what
know,
what it sounds like you're saying is criminals deserve to get any beatdown that they get if they're criminals.
not that they deserve it, but it's a part of the game.
Hmm. Okay. So and that's the thing that the reason why I wanted to come on here. I appreciate y'all's conversation and even letting me speak, and it's been respectful, and it will continue to be that way. I know from my end, because I'm all about listening and learning, and I'm an educator. And part of being an educator is being able to being receptive to learning, because I don't know everything. I just know my
Right.
experiences. And
Yeah.
what I do know from my learning is that there are countless studies, and a simple Google search would show that study after study says Black people are mistreated by police disproportionately, regardless of situation, regardless of crime, regardless of location, regardless of circumstance. And I mean, these studies have been for decades and decades and
Right.
decades in this country. So, um, to say that it's just like these are individual experiences
I believe
and
so.
these are one-off situations in the face of such personal evidence, video evidence,
I
statistical
think that
evidence, and empirical data seems kind of delusional a little bit. And I'm
right.
not saying you're delusional, but I'm saying the whole idea that this is not about race in a country that was founded upon a racial framework. The very first the very first law in this country was the Naturalization Act of 1790. That was the first law after the Constitution was written, and it said you're only a citizen if you're a white male. And the whole system of slavery, the whole system of Jim Crow, the whole system of redlining, all of these systems, every system that you can think of, including law enforcement, was designed with an anti-black perspective, an anti-black spin. And to know these facts, and see all of these things happening over and over again, and to continue to think that this is just isolated incidents and not a system, a framework of anti-blackness, it seems like we're almost denying reality because it's too painful to live in truth, not only for Black people,
Well,
but for the people who are putting that out there. Yeah, go ahead.
let me say this, right? Let me ask you a question. Do you feel as though they promote a message in our community which is counterproductive with how we interact with the police, where even if you watch like in the aftermath of George Floyd and some of these cases, the antagonistic approach that they almost promote in the media as far as how we interact with police, and not having enough um and not really promoting a more positive interaction with the police, whereas you learn how to de-escalate certain situations and don't make
Yeah.
situations worse on yourself.
Yeah. That de-escalation is not our responsibility. It is the police officer's responsibility. I mean, now we can help our situation, but it is their responsibility. Their job in the title is to protect and serve. Their job is to serve us. It's not upon us, the
But
untrained. It's not upon us, the untrained citizen, to know how to de-escalate situations. It's upon the trained police officers
I
who get
understand that. But
specific
what I'm asking you
de-escalation
is,
procedures.
what
Yeah.
I'm asking you is, shouldn't we be teaching our sons and younger ones how not to provoke and antagonize the police? And if you're in a situation, how to keep it calm? Keep your two hands on the steering wheel. Have
Hmm.
your ID above you in the visor so that they don't think you're reaching for nothing.
Right.
And
Right.
basic things, right, that you
Hmm.
learn that I learned earlier by older men in my life, that taught me how to interact with the police.
Oh,
So
so
when
you're.
I deviated from that,
Uh-huh.
because I was in front of a crowd, I got a little too cute, I played and doing something I wasn't supposed to do, which resulted in me getting my ass kicked. So I knew standard operations and procedures, but I deviated from it, and it resulted in me getting what happened. Right? It wasn't
Right.
nothing where I had to get hospitalized or I just got kicked
Roughed up.
around. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm sorry
shit
that
slapped
happened
out of.
to you, bro.
Well, like I say, it's all a part of the game. So
Yeah.
if you look at a lot of these situations where people get killed, whether it's Derek Gardner, George Floyd, Michael Brown, a lot of these situations were preventable if
Hmm.
if if the young brothers had understood how to conduct themselves when you encounter law enforcement. Because I don't see law enforcement I believe that we live in somewhat of a police state, period, and law
Mhm.
enforcement will always get the benefit of the doubt in a situation, in an altercation with a suspect, whether it's white, black, or whoever. Because, like you see with the two
Mm.
white boys that just got killed recently, the one Hunter Britton, unarmed white boy gunned down, the other white boy that got killed in the hotel room. There wasn't no big hoopla about a white community about what happened, and it wasn't even in the news like that. So,
Okay.
like I say, I think it's the media that creates the hysteria around it, and that gives off the wrong and promotes a certain counterproductive behavior
Well.
in our interactions with the police
Okay. Well.
that leads the other young brothers getting caught up and maybe losing their life.
Okay. Well, you said a couple of things that I found interesting there. You said that we don't teach that in our community, but then after that, you said that you were taught by the elders that on standard operating position procedure when dealing with the police.
I got raised by gangsters. They taught me how to like conduct myself when I leave the house. You know what I
Right.
mean? But
So you got
that's
taught.
not the message that's being taught now. If you look out now in the media now with Black Lives Matter or whatever it may be, they're teaching a more antagonistic, or they're promoting a more antagonistic type approach. Where in our
Mm,
everyday, where when I was growing up, niggas told you like, "Hey, chill." If the police pull up, it's like, "Hey, chill." If you start acting erratic, it'll be other dudes on the block that'll tell you, "Hey, man, you can't come back up here. You tripping."
See that now that's part of the issue too. The same media you're criticizing for promoting all of these murders of blacks is the same media that you're saying is promoting that we don't raise our children that way. Now the media says that, but in the homes of black people, I know it's being said. Like I said, I'm an educator, I'm a school teacher. I know personally most, if not all, of the black people I know, all the black parents that I know, they tell their children that all the time. I know I was raised that way be told, hey, you have to do this when you're around the police. I know you told me you were taught that way. Do you think that white people are taught that in their homes? When you're with the police, you could lose your life. You be
But
careful. Be
if we take the instances of the men that's been killed, that we're bringing up George Floyd, the rest of them, are they exhibiting the behaviors that we were taught, that you were taught, when dealing with the police?
most definitely. I mean, if you
Are
watch
you
George,
are you
well,
are you are you? Are you being sincere, brother? Did you actually watch the whole George Floyd video, or
Oh,
did you
most
just watch
definitely.
the knee on the neck?
Most definitely. I watched the whole video. I
Brother, the
watched
man
the
was
whole
acting.
video. He was he
Okay.
was acting erratic, but he was not acting violent. He was not acting hostile. He was not acting in a way that would
Brother,
necessitate him getting pulled out
brother,
of the car and
the
put his
man
knee in.
is 6'6" and would not get in the police car and was fighting and yelling and screaming and hollering and acting
Mm.
like he
He,
lost his fucking mind.
what was he screaming though? I'm claustrophobic. He screamed, "Cops! I've been shot by cops before." He was screaming, "I'm
Okay,
scared."
he was
These are not
acting erratic.
these are not. But Eve, let's assume that what you're saying was warranted. What warranted them putting this knee on the neck? How about why did they continue to
Brother,
have their knee on his neck when he had the handcuffs on and he was on his stomach
I'm
with
not
handcuffs on behind his
I'm not
back?
saying that they was right for doing what they did. I'm not taking up for the police and saying that the police was justified in what he did. What I'm saying is that George Floyd brought it upon himself
Oh
by
my
his
God!
behavior.
Yeah, we'll just have to disagree. Agree to
If
disagree
George
on
Okay.
that.
Floyd, if
Okay.
George Floyd
Let,
would have cuffed up and got in the car and went to jail, he would still be alive today. That's
Yikes!
just a fact.
let me just jump into the conversation right now,
Yes,
so that
please.
we don't go far off topic. But before we get back to the trauma thing, let me just respond to a couple of things that Marcus said. You said that black people are being killed disproportionately to their percentage representation in the population. I suppose black people are about 13% of the U.S. population. So probably they are killed more than 13%. But what are you expecting that if 10 persons are killed by the police in America, that it has to be 13%, that anything more than that is as a result of racism, that you have to be your representation in every sphere in life and in the general population has to be reflective of or close to the percentage of population that you have in that society. I don't think that is the case, because there are many factors that come into why people interact with the police and how people interact with the police. Now, in absolute numbers, more white people are killed, even more unarmed white people are killed than black people. But it
Not
is when you
unarmed,
bring it down to
but go ahead.
more unarmed white people are killed than black people. But when you put it in terms of, okay, proportionality, in terms of, okay, based on the percentage in the population, then that is where you now see that, okay, proportionately more black people are killed, but not in absolute numbers. Now, I don't want to be seen to be saying a conservative talking point, but you also have to take into consideration the frequency of encounter with the police, the black communities and the white communities. What's the frequency of encounter? If you want to also put it in proportion,
Yes.
say per thousand, what's the
Hmm.
frequency of if there are 1,000 black people and 1,000 white people, what is the
Right.
frequency of interaction with the police? If
Right.
one community has a higher frequency of encounter with the police, then you're going to
Why?
expect that along the line something is going to go wrong. You
My
understand?
question my question to you would be, my pushback to that statement would be, why are there more encounters in black communities with police?
Well, you would seem to say it is racism. Oh,
What would you
but
say? What would you say?
I don't know. I don't think the police will just pull you. The police would want to interact with you in a negative way when something is not off. For most
Why?
of the time,
See, and
for
that's
most
why.
of the time,
See, and that's the challenge I had with even when we were talking with the D'Angelo situation. You're in
hmm,
a different country. You don't see that. You have no, you, and that's similar to the many white people that I know.
okay,
They have
okay,
no
okay,
frame of
okay. I
reference to
don't I don't
understand that.
see that, but Bo is in the US. He can confirm what I'm saying. Lakia is there. Chloe is there. I have so many black friends that are over there,
I
and
can't.
they
Ask
can
them all.
confirm what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think you're being dishonest, brother. Or I don't know where you're from. You know what I mean? But
So
if you look at, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say, so for all of the other Black Americans on this call here, would you say, have you ever seen, or yeah, have you ever seen or been experienced to police stopping you for no apparent reason in unwarranted situations, in situations where you did nothing illegal?
Brother, I'm from
Yes.
Overtown.
So you
I grew up in Overtown, right?
Overtown, what state?
In Miami.
Oh my goodness. Yikes.
Right.
So you've seen it regularly,
So
yes?
when we talk about racial profiling, right, we
Yes.
gotta be honest what it means.
Yes, please.
So me getting stopped by the police, leaving out of the corner store as a kid, I can't be surprised, right? Like I know why. Like
Why?
I know because I know that they sell dope in front of this store. I
But
know
you
it.
don't know. But the cops don't know that you do.
But the
They just
cops
know
don't
that.
know that I don't. Exactly. The cops don't
Right.
know that I don't. All the cops know that is young black men who stand in front of the store that sell dope. And me walking in, being that I'm from the area and I know all of them, I talk to them, hey bro, what's up? What's up? What's up? I go in the store. When I leave out the store and five police pull up now and now they want to search me. So it's like it's not as if they're just walking home from school with your book bag on, you know what I'm saying, headed home after the bell ring, you getting harassed. Like we know when these situations arise and
Wow.
the motivation behind them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
So
in
they have police have hotspots that they know where there's high crime and high drug activity at, right? And if
brother,
you
you
happen to find yourself in one of those places, then it's not a it shouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to think that you may get caught up within somebody else's bull crap
wow.
that has
That
nothing to do with you.
so then the
Am I
whole
Okay,
lying?
okay,
I won't
guys,
say lying.
guys,
Yes, sir.
let's just so that we don't derail. So let's get back to psychotherapy.
Yes, please.
I made certain assertions, Marcos, probably before you joined. When I asked you about some of the issues that Black people are facing, you mentioned mass incarceration, you mentioned Black people not being able to get loans, and amongst other things. Now, I get a feeling that some of these things may have been very, very true in the past, and I may be wrong, but I get a feeling that some of these things may be very, very true in the past, but they are not so true nowadays. Like the loan thing, I don't think a Black person who meets the criteria for getting a loan today would be denied for no other reason than the color of his skin. So
Mm,
it ties to me. What the sense I get from that is that it is possible that these people have learned this. Some African Americans have learned this sort of traumatic experience from people before them, such
mm,
that even when they are not experiencing such trauma, they're having an emotional psychological response to that trauma. So
mm.
what do you think?
I think that you clearly haven't done any research about recent information regarding that. I mean, I'm sure of it because there again, and like I said in the post, uh, you a simple Google search of recent past will tell you that those things are in fact a reality, that lending practices are still biased, uh, loan practices are still biased. All of the things that I mentioned, all of those things that I mentioned in the post are current. They're not just a thing of the past. And I I I hesitate to continue in the conversation because if I get the impression that the same quote unquote victim mentality argument that many people, many white or non-black people, and apparently some black people make about black people is based in a deliberate or a willful ignorance. Like to not know that lending and practices, hiring practices, healthcare disparities, disproportionate profiling, and all of these things, to think those things are a thing of the past in light of just looking in the environment and then looking at the data and then talking to those people, to black people, or going into these predominantly black communities and witnessing those things, it seems like there's this willful willful ignorance. It's not only it's not even an ignorance. I think we know it, but we just can't admit to the fact that there
Why
is
do I
this
see some fancy restaurants closed? You know they
racism.
were.
Now, what I will also say too is I appreciate the talk because I think it's important that that black people really discuss these things and get some clarity about it. I will have you both know, or you all know, that I'm actually married to a white woman. So I'm not, and we've been married for almost 15 years. I'm not at all like hate Whitey and Whitey's the cause of all problems. I'm not that person. But at the same time, I'm not going to uh, be dishonest with myself,
Do
and
you
I'm not
live in a
going.
black community? Do you live in a predominantly black community?
It's about half and half. It's about half and half. But I've lived in dominantly black communities. I'm originally from California, and some people would think that California is a more progressive place, but it definitely isn't. And
Were you raised in a more predominantly black area in California?
I wasn't raised in a more predominantly black area, but I moved to a
So
predominantly black area.
your experiences aren't indicative of what's happening in. I just told you I'm from Overtown. That's a 99% predominantly black community.
Right.
So
And
I've
what
seen it. So I've seen it all when we have this conversation around policing and police brutality. Like I go back to Neville Johnson. You know what I mean? Like y'all wouldn't know about that, but Neville
yeah,
Johnson
actually
riots when the
I actually
police
know.
killed him. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I
Like
actually know a little bit about Neville Johnson, but yes, but see, and
okay, that
that's
happened right. That happened right where I lived at when I was a kid. I remember being a little kid watching that.
mhm. Was
But
he armed?
this, it was, it was a crazy situation, right? And he was a funny character. Let's
But
just
it
put
was
it like that.
yeah, but
But
you would
the
you
thing is, when you live in high crime areas, we can't discount the fact that when you live in high crime areas and things happen around them, that we can't control the outcome. And I think what it shows us is that we need to do a better job of policing our own areas where we don't have to call into the police. Because what you see in a lot of
that's
black
true.
areas is that it's the old women, the single mothers. They call and request for a heavier police presence,
Hmm.
which allows for these interactions to happen. They call on the Arab store owner that owns the store, but allows young dudes to stand in front of his store and sell drugs. They
Right,
call the police and force the police to break that up.
right. Now
So
that
it's not that it's racial profiling or that they just come to see black men. It's that it's a effort by the community to try to clean up certain areas and hold each other accountable. So
the
we can't just dismiss it as institutional racism when, like you say, my experiences with getting beat up by the police was by a black police officer, but they won't show
mhm.
that in the media
Well, of
because
course
it
not.
doesn't support the narrative.
Of course not. And what you said is true as far as policing our own communities. And I do want to stay on this trauma perspective because that's the original focus of the talk. But I did want to say that the black people policing their own communities and having more responsibility and accountability for our own actions does not mean that systemic racism is also present. It doesn't mean that that's not present just because what you said is a reality does not negate the reality that there is this systemic anti-blackness that has been permeated throughout our society. And I also will say, even though I did not grow up around a majority of black people in the environment I live, I was still, even in a predominantly, it was mixed because I'm from Coronado and South San Diego, which is like a military town. And I was around primarily Hispanics, Filipinos, Samoans, Pacific Islanders, whites, blacks, everything because it was a military town. And even in that military town, I don't know if you knew this, but the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan lived in my city, and I was a victim of profiling by police in a predominantly white area. And then I moved to Los Angeles in the '90s and lived during the time with the Rodney King beat down and the O.J. Simpson trial and all of these things, and getting back to our trauma about these things, when you experience those things as a young kid, like you getting shaken down by the police when you were a child, like me getting shaken down by the police when I was a child, whether warranted or not, that causes that level of trauma and that level of fear and that level of distrust of police that predominantly white people do not experience and will never experience in their life. Now,
Okay.
and that trauma is not forgotten with all of this media reinforcement of black death and black terrorism. Those things were systematically designed to do the things that they do for us black people, which is to keep us paralyzed psychologically and traumatized psychologically in the same way that public lynchings did back in the 30s and 40s or whatever. What the media and the system of white supremacy is doing now is the same thing. Let me show you black death. Let me put it all over plastered all over the screen. It's going to serve two purposes. One, black people are going to be traumatized, fearful, less able to move forward and progress. Because I'm talking as a black male again, who's an educator, who's college educated, 6-figure income, and all that stuff. But I'm speaking for people whose voices won't be heard, who aren't in academia, and who aren't given all of these privileges, so they won't be active in the struggle for equity and equality. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to trauma, there are some traumas that Black Americans face that other groups do not have to face, nor even have to think about, and trauma that seeks to continue the system that's formed. Because I think you could ask any person in America whether they would rather be treated as a white person in America or
Can
as
I
a
just make a
non-white
quick
person.
point?
Yeah.
Because what you see is that a lot of time, right, is that there's a disconnect, right? So you have blacks that don't grow up in the environment or that's
Uh-huh.
not in the environment that they're speaking of, right? So they kind of overcompensate, right? And they're not really privy to a lot of the nuances of the discussion, being that as though they're removed from the situation, right? So by you
Uh-huh.
being married to a white woman and
Uh-huh.
growing up in, let's just say, a diverse background, right? A non-predominant black community,
Uh-huh.
you don't really have the real experiences of growing up in the black community where you can understand the nuances, right? Where when you see black dudes that get locked up and you see the crime statistics or incarceration rate, where it doesn't surprise you as much because you understand what's going on the ground level, right?
I'm
Or
not. I'm
maybe if
not.
you see, or
I'm not
there's
surprised
different.
by that. I'm not surprised by that, nor am I not understanding the dynamics of criminals getting criminal sentences. I went to jail for a felony. So I understand that completely. And even though I didn't grow up around that environment, that doesn't make me less understanding of the black condition, because I still had a black mother. I still had a black father. I still had black brothers. I still experienced specific anti blackness in the way that I was treated by friends,
And
by
another thing,
teachers, by all of those things. So to say that just because I didn't grow up in a predominantly black area, that I don't understand the nuances of what it means to be black in America, that's
not
that's
just
the, that's the same thing that a white person would say to me.
not
You know what
just
I'm saying?
that though, not just that though, right? But also by you being able to achieve what you achieve and marry that white woman and be accepted into that community or whatever, you know what I'm
I'm
saying,
not accepted into the community.
and be able to earn six figures, right? I
Yeah.
find it ironic that it's always the black people that's reached a certain level of success, you know what I'm saying, in the
Uh-huh.
simulation that seem to drum the beats of white supremacy so loud, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas the people
Yeah.
that's
I can
on
understand.
the black, yeah, it baffles me. It
Yeah.
really does.
Well, I would like to, if I could, and I just don't want to dominate the conversation. So if anybody has anything to interject, I'm more than happy. But if I'm allowed, I'd like to clear up some of that confusion, and so you're not so baffled about that situation, if I could.
Okay. So now back to the trauma. I think
Yes.
Marcus, you agreed that um, you know inundating the senses of black people with this information is traumatic.
Yes.
Let me give you maybe sort of a personal experience from my own country. You know, while I was growing up, I used to fear the police, and one of the reasons why I feared the police was because of how I saw them. I mean, in a vehicle, driving in a vehicle, seeing people driving vehicles, I used to just fear the police because most of the time they will stop drivers and they will harass them and extort them and do all that. So when I started driving, initially I had that fear. I had that fear
Yes.
until I understood something that those people that the police were harassing, they were not all that innocent. Many of them, their papers were never complete, their restrictions were never complete. So they were always going to be victimized by the police because already they had something going on with them. But when I started driving, my papers were always complete. I was polite to the police. I've never had issues with this same police that I used to dread as a kid. I mean, seeing them alone just gives me this negative vibe. Like these people are terrible, terrible. See the way they treat drivers and all that. But because as a kid I didn't understand the context of they are victimizing those drivers. I just saw it that this is what plays across. So don't you think that that's part of the case here, where you take on trauma that might not be directly related to you, but because you have seen it in your environment. When you see the pictures of George Floyd, you see the picture of other black people being killed. When you go
Mhm.
out there and you encounter a police person, you're already amped up. You're already feeling that negative vibe. You're already feeling that somehow they're going to victimize you. Somehow the police is going to harass
Mhm.
you because you're constantly fed that message that this is the way the police interacts with black people. Don't you think that's an issue?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask because I didn't fear the police at all growing up in a quote unquote diverse community. I didn't fear him at all until I got to college, and at 18 years old was terrorized by the police. That brought the fear in me. So I'm not the best person to ask about that. Now I can understand to some degree how some individuals who have never encountered police could have this unreasonable fear of police based on what the media propagates. I could definitely see that. However, uh, that fear in the majority, I would say, of black people is not unfounded. It's not it's not a figment of our imagination that we are largely mistreated by police. Now, does that mean that all police mistreat all black people on site? Absolutely not. I've had many experiences also where a police officer has treated me well and uh, um, but even when I wasn't in the wrong, they might have stopped me, whatever. But they treated me well, or got away with a warning, or whatever. I understand the reality that not all police officers are bad in all situations, but I think it's short sighted to say that that black mistrust of police is unfounded, unwarranted, only because we're doing involved in criminal activity and we deserve to get followed and profiled and done all of that. If you're in a
I never
if you're
said deserve though.
I know, well, you didn't say deserved, but it was implied when you said that. Well, I lived in a high crime area, so that's just part of the game.
I
That
said it was understandable.
well, okay, understand. So I don't even think that it's understandable that just because I live in a high crime area, I'm subject to be just profiled and assumed that I'm criminal and checked and searched. I don't think that that's understandable, no matter where I live,
It
because
is. It is
yeah,
understandable because the risks are higher in that place. Because you see, the police, they're not psychic. They cannot, by looking at an individual, tell that this person is a criminal or not. So
right.
if they're policing an area that has a high crime rate, they're going to be more apt, they're going to be more cautious, and they're going to be more suspicious of anybody. That is understandable. I don't see how that is racial.
Well, do you think?
If the issue of the frequent interactions of police with black people is, if crime is at the heart of the issue, then we have to look at that. We have to look at that factor. We cannot
Well,
remove crime and just bring both interactions together and say it has to be race, it has to be racism.
see, that's what
So
I'm
When I,
saying.
what do you
What you
want?
what
What do you
you guys
want?
are.
That these communities should not be policed? Police should be
Mhm.
drawn away from these communities? Is that the way to go?
But what you seem to be saying is that it's never racial.
No, I didn't say it's never
I know.
racial. I never said that.
That's why I said
I
it
never said
seems.
it's never racial.
I said that's why it seems to be. That's what you're saying. Because I'm saying there are there is an evidence is shown that it is racial a
can,
lot of the time.
can I say something
Go
Please.
to
ahead.
what he said? Since
Mhm.
George Floyd has died, right?
Yes.
5 children that I know of, right, under the age of 18, has been murdered in my city, right?
Wow.
That I know of. That I
That's
know of.
so unfortunate.
And it's maybe more, but I'm just saying like the ones I can think of off the top of my head. And none of them have garnered national spotlight. None of them have garnered any protests. None of them have garnered nothing.
Why
Nothing.
do you think that is?
Because it doesn't play into the narrative.
It
So
would
so
it would
these
most definitely play into the narrative.
so these people who you want me to sympathize with, that the police are harassing them or whatever, that's the genesis of a lot, the catalyst to a lot of these crimes that's happening in our community, that's allowing little kids to get killed by stray bullets and all that. You know what I mean? Like the police are there to do a job, and they're called in and they're requested to, because when little kids get murdered in the community, people like you and the other people, Black Lives Matter, and the other people that cry about white supremacy, you're not gonna do nothing. You don't even live in these neighborhoods where these crimes are happening at. You're
Well,
not
you
gonna help the situation. You're not gonna do nothing to go out there and help catch the perpetrators. You know what I
well that
mean?
that's an
So
assumption that you're making about me that has nothing to do with all of the social justice warriors that are out there. Like I told you, I'm an educator, and now I currently teach middle school math in a predominantly it's about 40% black in that community. I do plenty for the community in addition to talking about white supremacy. So I understand what you're saying though, because there's definitely a lot of black Americans that are out there talking, beating the drum, saying it's the police's fault, but won't go into those communities. But what I will also say is that if the police's job is to stop crime, it just seems ironic that the cities with the largest predominantly black community and the largest police forces also have the largest crime rates. If they're there to do a job which is to stop crime, if that, like what I thought I heard you say, then why aren't these large police forces actually stopping crime? They're
Okay.
coming after the
You,
fact.
you said, why are they not stopping crime? But when they try to be more proactive in stopping the crime, you feel you are being racially profiled. So which is it? You do your damned, you don't your damned.
No, no, you do your job. You do your job, and
No,
you do
no, no,
no, no.
no.
Listen,
If
listen.
see,
If
if
this,
there is a high crime rate in a predominantly black area, and the
yes,
police, because they want to prevent crime, they
they
have
don't
to
want to
over
prevent.
police sort of. No,
They,
I'm just
mhm.
saying, if they want to prevent that crime, they have to
Right.
sort
If
of over police, and they have to look out for certain cues, and many
right,
people who are innocent might get harassed in the way of doing that job.
right.
And when that happens, it's going to be construed as racial profiling. And if they don't do
Not if they're doing their
anything,
job effectively. I have to push back right there, and I had to stop you right there because if they're doing their job effectively, if you're in an area that has high crime, and I understand the the pathology of black anti-snitching. Yeah, I understand that too. That there's a lot of black people whose children are the perpetrators of these crimes who they won't tell on, whose relatives are perpetrators of the crime who they won't tell on, and it makes it harder for the police to do their job. However, if you're in a high crime area and you're staked out as a police officer in an area that happens to be high drug trafficking, if you're there and you're vigilant 24 hours a day and that could easily be done by having 3 8-hour shifts. One person be at this location for 8 hours, another person be there for 8 hours, another person be there for the last 8 hours. That would if crime prevention was the goal, that would eradicate, especially in these areas that have huge police forces and huge budgets. That would be that would eradicate 90% of the problems. In addition to that, if crime prevention was a goal, there would be a community outreach program where police officers lived in the areas that they were policing so they could get to know the individuals, and the individuals would be less mistrustful and fearful of the police. These are all the assumptions if crime prevention in high crime black communities, and I want to say specifically black communities, because we're not seeing these high levels of police presence in trailer parks and backwoods rural meth lab areas that they are in these black communities. So
Because we live in highly populated areas. Rural communities are more dispersed. But if you live in an urban environment with buildings stacked on top of each other, mostly apartment buildings or whatever, so the policing is going to be different. But at the same time, like Charles said, it's an impossible job because if they increase police presence and all that, then they're going to say that they're harassing people.
no,
And then, for
not if they're
example,
just sitting there.
let me give you an example, right? You can look this up. There was a
Okay.
police chief. There was a police chief in Miami Gardens, right? There was
Okay.
a store that was a known drug hangout, right, where they sold drugs at.
Right.
So the police chief started something where they specifically targeted that store and people coming and going from that store because they learned that drugs were being sold there. Everybody knew it.
Yes.
The people protested when they found out that that store was being targeted. They protested and got the police chief fired.
Well, that's ridiculous. You know, if everybody knows that that's a high crime area, again, that goes back to mistrust of the police. There are some people who are more concerned about police presence than they were about stopping crime in their own community, and that's a
How
separate
does that
issue.
how does that even make sense? I mean, how do you suspend logic in this instance? Okay, let me give another example. With
Wait,
my
no, wait. Go back to
country.
that. You said suspend logic. Where did I suspend logic?
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about
Oh,
you. I mean those people who would prefer who would prefer crime to interacting with the police, who would choose having crime in their community rather than having more police in their community.
well,
It really doesn't make sense to me.
can I speak to that before you go to your next point?
Okay, go ahead.
Um, in a high crime community, in a community where drugs are proliferating throughout that community, there's a lot of joblessness that creates that high crime. There's a lot of poverty that creates that high crime. And if I say I have a cousin who I know is slinging drugs in this high crime community, and he's bringing home thousands and thousands of dollars and feeding my family, I would definitely be less prone to tell on him and allow police presence in that community if it's feeding my impoverished family and and taking care of some of the basic necessities I have. And that's the politics of poverty. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention
But
how do
it's
those
not an
communities
excuse. It's
how are
not
those
an
communities
excuse
created?
for it, poverty
It's
is
not
not
an
an excuse
excuse.
for crime. It's
It's
not an
not an
excuse for
excuse.
crime. So
It's not an excuse. It's a fact. And again, just like we were talking about with the rural white communities, they sell drugs and do drugs at about the same amount as black communities do. That does that make it right? No. Does that make it an excuse for them to do it? No. But it's a reality. Poor people will do whatever they need to do to survive, and if that means selling drugs, that's what they'll do. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying that it's right, but I'm saying it's a reality. And I'm also saying that it's strange how black people don't own uh, coca coca farms. We don't have big factions of black people in Colombia to grow cocaine and distribute cocaine and import it into these areas. How did these communities get all of the drugs into them? How did they get people stacked on top of each other that are poor in these communities. I would also, again, being an educator, I've been obsessed about this. That's why I love this conversation. And again, I thank you all for letting me talk. I'm trying to learn how to talk less, but I'm hopeful that you guys can leave this conversation thinking a little more critically about causation. Why are these things the way they are? Not just the outcome of those things. You know, if I say white supremacy uh, has dictated what the police do, what loan officers do, and what all of these different institutions do, that doesn't mean that that's the only reason for black conditions in this United States. A lot of it has to do with what your whole podcast or was about here, which is trauma. This trauma keeps people mentally frozen, keeps people paralyzed, keeps people uh, going through this dysfunction, self-medicating with drugs, self-medicating with alcohol, self-medicating with sex, and all of the and materialism and all of these different things that are dysfunctions, traditional dysfunctions in the black community. I would say all of them have, in large part, been predicated by this system of white supremacy that has made us poor, that has taken all our land, that has taken our property, our identity, our religion, our names, and all of these things. It's not the only reason, because now in the last 50 years, we've been able, when the laws changed, we were able to acquire some wealth, but this mental stability still has us disagreeing, not unified, skeptical, jealous, envious. Those things are all true, and those are all products of trauma. But to say that white supremacy and racism isn't as big of an issue as I and others are making it seems like we're just missing so much of historical evidence, current evidence, video evidence, empirical evidence, and personal experience. I mean, Bo Diddley even talked about it. As a kid, he was searched by police. What police officer decides I'm just going to start? I'm going to start profiling, harassing, searching children. You see what I'm
Okay.
saying?
So now that you've admitted that this trauma is indeed real, how do you how do you deal with this trauma in the black community? What can black people do to overcome this trauma so that they can be more productive?
Great question. Uh, um, I opine, talking about it like I'm doing right now. For me, this is very therapeutic, and I think for the black community, would also be therapeutic is um, just to live your best life, be your best self, take accountability for your own actions, because it really doesn't matter what we do. White supremacy and racism will be a part of our existence until white people decide that they don't want enough white people decide that they don't want white supremacy and racism to be the bedrock and the foundation of this society. While they're figuring it out, black people can deal with their trauma through, again, talking, some form of therapy, and conversation about experience and sharing commonalities. That's a form of therapy combined with finding peace and peacefulness in your life. And that's, you know, that happens in the home with learning how to communicate and collaborate with your family members in your homes, and in your community at large. Um, Outreach programs that emphasize self determination, self respect, self love, self pride. Learning a skill is a way to reduce trauma, because if you have a skill, then this whole system of white supremacy can't take away from you the things that you're skillful in. And that's part of the reason why I'm a teacher. I can't, if they decided that, hey, you're not cut out to be a teacher in your school district and you're fired, I can go to another school district because I have the skills to overcome any type of situation
Uh-huh.
that's traumatic.
Uh-huh. So you it seems like everything you just said kind of like contradicts your position on white supremacy.
No,
Whereas
it is.
there's actual tangible things that can be done to counteract this supposed white supremacy,
Not
such as
counteract,
learning,
not
such
not
as
not counteract, but
what
overcome.
make it what invalidate it,
Overcome.
overcome it.
Overcome.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
that doesn't
Over,
invalidate it. That just says that
well, you can
despite you
overcome it
being,
then.
oh, definitely.
Okay,
I'm not saying
overcome
that
it.
you, yeah,
Okay,
you can overcome it. Definitely.
okay. So if you can overcome it, then that means it's not eh, systematic. You know what I
What?
mean? Like
No,
systematic. Hold on a second.
okay.
Systematic racism was Jim Crow laws, was apartheid. You couldn't overcome that just by picking up a skill or by, you know what I'm saying, getting active and taking care of your mental health, talking amongst yourself. You are still gonna be confined to the systems of white supremacy. But now all you have to do is get some knowledge, you know what I'm saying, and get a skill set, you know what I'm saying, become more active in your community in a positive way, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah,
and then all of these things, then the grasp that white supremacy have over on you, you'll be able to overcome
exactly. That doesn't mean that over white supremacy and
it.
racism does. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist anymore, though. That just means that I dealt with it, like Black people have done for the entire history, really, of the world. We've overcome these things. I mean, to be able to be living now throughout slavery and Jim Crow and mass lynchings and all of the things that happens means that we can overcome and we will overcome. That does not mean that that system is eradicated just because we're able to rise above and jump over those hurdles. You know, it's like
Okay.
it's yeah,
Um, Marcus,
yes,
I'm
sir.
very happy that you made this point. I mean, almost this last point that you made. Um, it showed to me that these problems are not problems that cannot be overcome. They're actually ways to overcome it. And that has been a central thesis of my conversation about race in YouTube for the longest time.
Hmm.
You mentioned something else that white supremacy and racism is not going to go is not going to go away until white people decide that it's time for it to go. So
Yes,
it's actually not in your power. It's not something that you can change. There's nothing you can actually do about it. If someone is a
exactly.
racist, there's nothing you can do about it. But there is something else that you could do to actually counteract whatever racist thing that other person is doing. So why isn't the focus on what we can do rather than what the other person is doing that we can do nothing about? Why isn't the focus on that?
Well, that's the narrative that society is putting out, that we're only focused on what other people are doing to us. That's the narrative that's put out, and for a number of reasons, it's put out that way. It's it's for to increase white resentment about Black people saying, "Oh, well, they just want stuff, or they're just lazy and they can't do it for themselves. Why don't they pick themselves up for their from their bootstraps?" Blah blah blah, and the different talking points that are used to increase white resentment to not want to dismantle white supremacy. You know, if white people and obviously Black people are thinking, well, Black people, it's on us to do these things only, and when these things aren't happening, well, then it must be a character flaw. You know, and ironically, that's exactly what white supremacy, the title white supremacy, does. It says that one group is supreme and the other group is inferior or a lesser version of this supreme version. And the notion that Black people's actions alone are going to are going to uh, eradicate the system, and if we don't adhere to this individual improvement, that our problems are only because of what we're doing or not doing. That's like that's like saying, uh, I just physically abused my son or daughter for years and years and years, and then I wonder why they have dysfunction in their life as an adult. You can't you if we're talking about trauma, you have to understand what the consequences of this physical, emotional, and psychological trauma does to people's ability to progress in meaningful and positive ways. I'm not saying that it can't happen, because again, I'm a testament. I think every one of us here talking is a testament to the fact that you can still live a productive life even though you've experienced trauma. It might not be we might not be our best selves yet. We're working towards that. But to say just because uh, we've been able to overcome it, it doesn't A mean that other people are going to be able to overcome it in the same ways. It also does not mean that B, that the system of racism, supremacy doesn't exist or is just a figment of our imagination or is just overblown. It doesn't say any of that. My success has nothing to do with the system that's in place. My success has so
Okay.
much to do with my ability to understand the system, manage the system, and navigate my life throughout the system.
That seems like life to me. What you just described seems like life to me. I mean, that's what
But,
happens in
but it
in
doesn't
in
happen to
life.
everybody. That's the problem.
That's what
It doesn't
happens in
happen.
life. You have to, in your job, you have to navigate things. If there are challenges, you have to navigate. Nothing
But you,
ever comes. See. You do you believe that human beings face challenges in life and that these challenges are surmountable?
yeah. Are you still there?
Okay. So
Yes.
see this race issue as one of such of life's challenges that is unique to a black person. Because frankly, to me, I don't care about white supremacy and I don't care about racism. I know they exist, but I don't care about them. And if I'm a black person living in America, I'm not going to be defined by them because you yourself, your success and the successes of so many other black Africans that I've interacted with has actually proven that despite the white supremacy, despite the racism and all that, you can still forge ahead. That there is actually a path, there's actually a way to circumvent it, there's a way to counteract it, there's a way to surmount it. And if that way exists, then I don't care. I don't care about someone who's racist. I don't care because it's not the action that's going to determine my outcome. It's the way I respond to it and how I'm able to navigate through it. That is what's going to determine it. And I know that okay, you said that this narrative is not being pushed so much in the media and all that, but we need to start talking about it much more and more. We need to get black people more focused on we need to get black people more focused on, there are ways, tell black people there are ways to actually do these things. Some black
Yeah.
people might not be aware that there are ways to actually solve these
See,
problems.
that
So,
that's a challenge I'm having with what you're saying is you're making the assumption that these conversations and these self-empowerment techniques and ideas and ideals are not happening in black communities because of our outcomes, and that's just not true. I can't. I mean, I would opine that Bo Diddley's OGs and his family and everything talked about what it means to be an upstanding citizen. I know my parents did. I think every black parent, every black parent that's being responsible. And I would venture to say there are way more black parents that are trying to be responsible than are not trying to be responsible about raising their kids in ways that will benefit them. Because we, as black people in America, know we innately know that we have to be at our best to overcome a lot of the things that we deal with in these situations. So I don't disagree that we definitely, as black people, need to be um, more adamant about promoting responsibility and accountability and solidarity and and developing skills and developing traits. We definitely need to do that at a high level and even more than we're doing it now. But at the same time, we wouldn't be having to do that so much if this was an equal system where white supremacy and anti black racism wasn't the foundation. We wouldn't have to work this extra hard because, like I said, and like we know, um, racism is a hurdle that white people do not have to deal with. They don't have to face that. They don't have to worry about in a society where 80% of the teachers are white. 80% of all or 90% of all judges and supreme and district attorneys are white when 100% of the presidents, well, 99 and a half with Obama, have been white. 100% of the vice presidents have been, well, now 99 and a half because Kamala Harris is in there, Kamala, where 90% of all filmmakers, 90% of all of the Fortune 500 company executives, all of these things where it's disproportionately white. Being white means that you don't have to deal with going into a job and being mistreated and being not hired and being looked over. You don't have to go into a loan office and worry about the idea of them just not giving you a loan or not, or appraising your house as less. You don't have to worry if you're a white person by getting stopped by the cops that this could be your last day on earth. At least you don't have to worry about it in the ways that black people do. These are things that you can't discount. The whole concept of white supremacy and racism is built on that. Not only are white people superior, but they're at the top of everything. They're the leaders of everything. They're the decision makers of everything. And that's how it has always
Well,
been in this country.
what does that mean? That's superior. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that in superiority is white is the standard by which every other group of people that is not white is measured by. If if
Do you think that the Asian computer science students are measured by whiteness?
Definitely, because when
But
you say
they're excelling. They're excelling.
that's not true. That's not altogether true because Asian is not just Japanese and Chinese. Those individuals who have specific skills or specific, I won't even say Asian and Chinese. I'll say Indian because Indian and Pakistani and Afghani and all those are Asian people too. Now, Indian people are excelling in this country because they are specifically trained to be doctors and they have specific trades and skills that they're able to come to this country to utilize, get our education and utilize those skills. And if it doesn't work out for them, they could move back to India
No,
if they
but
chose to.
my point was that you said you define superiority as being the benchmark by which other groups are measured by, right?
Yes, sir.
So, okay, but Indians and Asian Chinese kids, they're excelling past whites in technology and in STEM fields. So
Well,
they're the benchmark as it relates to those fields or whatever.
so if you look at all the studies, if you look at the studies of that, A,
So
they're not.
how would they be? So I don't believe that an Asian kid would view a white person as superior to him when
Well,
it comes to education and excelling in the tech industry or whatever.
Well, you don't believe that, but if you look at the statistics, you would find that that is not the case. If you're talking about South Korean, if you're talking about Taiwanese, if you're talking because Asia is not just Chinese and
Okay,
Japanese.
but it doesn't matter. My point is that there's groups that's excelling far beyond white people in
But that's
different
not
fields,
true.
and
That's what I'm trying to tell you is that's not true.
I have never heard. I
Look, we
that
can
that
look it up
that's
right now.
just disturbing, brother. That just
We have
disturbs me.
we have Google. We can look up the information if you'd like. We have
Wait,
Google.
may
We
I
can look it up
may
right
I
now.
interrupt?
Okay, let's keep Stanley, then Mr. Pelu will go. Stanley,
I,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to go to Bo's side. Um, Statistics, really?
Yeah.
I thoroughly disagree. I hear a Candace Owens
hmm
go back to pre 1965, pre like back in the day of Jim Crow,
Uh-huh.
when black families were together, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
My question is why did Patrick Moynihan come up with statistics of a broken black family in the first place? It's not because everything was working well.
Right.
And I'm going to be honest, statistics can number one say what you want them to say if you cherry pick.
That's true.
And after I say what I'm going to say, I'm going to make something totally racist. Charles is going to kick me off because
Please don't.
I don't trust the statistics
Me neither.
in a racist society during Jim Crow. How can we really believe that black families were together when there's a whole tradition of selling us apart? I'm simply not going to trust pre 1965
I did
statistics.
not. Yeah. So
And I'm going to say the part that's going to get me kicked off. Statistics are a white thing,
Yes, I
period.
agree. I agree. I just use statistics because that's what we were talking about too. Uh,
But that's also a way of escaping the statistical thing. It's a Candace Owens thing.
yeah,
It's
she's awful.
a black conservative thing, and that I love Thomas Sowell, but the statistics part of this argument plays into it. I simply cannot trust Jim Crow statistics.
Yes, I'm with you.
All right. So
Mm,
let's let Mr. Pelu. Mr.
Yeah,
Pelu, go ahead.
yeah.
Go
Uh,
ahead.
I'm sorry for the rant.
no, no. Thank you for saying that because I agree with you wholeheartedly that statistics are definitely a supremacist ideal. I only mention statistics because
I'm not going to
because
say supremacist. I'm going, dude, I'm a trained chemist. I
yes,
know what numbers can do.
I know, and like you said, they can definitely fit whatever your narrative that you're trying to
They
promote.
can, they can
I only
also
mentioned it
they can work for either side. I think
exactly.
numbers are neutral.
I agree, but I only brought that up because the word Asian was brought up, and saying Asians are excelling more than white people is not true. Not completely true in the sense that it's not all Asians. It's a particular group of Asians. If you talk about Asians on the whole, they're definitely not excelling in as much as is propagated in the media and as much as white people are in this country. And I only use statistics because I wanted to kind of delineate between different groups of Asians. Okay, because
Okay.
they're all
Okay.
lumped together
Mr.
for different reasons.
Mr. Pelu, go ahead.
I'm sorry I ranted. My
No,
apologies.
no, that's okay. Mr. Pelu, are you there? Yeah, go ahead. You're still muted. Okay, go ahead. You can speak now, Mr. Pelu. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Mr.
You on
Pelu.
mute? You on mute, Pelu?
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Bo, do you have anything? Do you have anything to say to what
Hello,
both
hello. I
Stanley
don't
and
know what's going
Marcus
on
said?
with my phone. Can you hear me now?
Right. We
Okay,
hear.
okay.
Yeah, we hear
Okay,
Yeah,
you.
we
yeah,
can hear you. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. I said I missed most of the talk. I don't know what was talked about, but I see that the topic is it's mental. I'm sorry. The topic is mental health, and I think one thing that might be messing up mental health. I just heard y'all talking about the statistics, but I think one thing that might be messing mental health is maybe is family structure, might be mental health, but people are always growing up in broken homes. Like for example, like there's a stigma to go to the doctor and get mental health because nobody wants to be labeled as crazy, right? And nobody wants the crazy labels, and actually a legal status too. If you go to the doctor and label you crazy, you might have legal issues, whatever. But like for example, I think traditionally people had counselors in their families, most notably grandparents, right? But a lot of people nowadays don't even know their grandparents like that. Don't even know both their grandparents. Like a lot of people I grew up with, they don't know both sets of grandparents completely. It's rare for people to know both sets of grandparents completely. You know what I'm
But
saying nowadays?
you mean white and black, right?
You didn't, I
Most
don't know about white
white
people. To
people
be honest
don't
with you,
know their
I can't tell you about
grandparents.
white people. I don't know too much about white people. I don't know too much about white people and their families, what's
Well,
going
you
on in
should
white
start
families. I don't know.
learning.
To be honest with you, I don't know. I can only speak about black folks in the DC metropolitan area. Okay, that's the only people I know about. It's only people, families I know about that I grew up around enough to tell you about them. Know, and white people too. Yeah, okay, okay, yeah. White people to everybody. It's not just everybody, but okay, everybody. Whether you white or black or not, if you don't have grandparents around, I mean, that's the people. That's your natural counselor to me. Is your grandparents. You know what I'm saying? That's your natural counselor. I was lucky. I grew up with my grandparents in the same house. My grandparents live with me. My mom's parents they live with me, and in my life, the closest person to me was my grandparents. They're closer to me than my own parents that born me, and that helped me out a lot. And when they died, it was almost like my parents died because to me, my grandparents, were my parents, because they raised me, so they counsel me. So I think that's one thing that will help a lot of people. People had intact family structure, had grandparents who had like lots of experience, you know what I'm saying, in life, and they've been through everything, and the people and they're honest about their mistakes. because you can't just counsel about somebody and think you know everything. You gotta be honest about your mistakes and honest with yourself about your mistakes. But that right there will a big healing thing. That's my take on mental health. I think grandparents are the greatest thing for mental health.
All right, Chloe, welcome to the conversation. So, jump right in.
So I probably missed about the last 20 to 30 minutes of the conversation. I kind of wish that the therapist was still here because I wanted to talk about like complex PTSD. But I guess touching on what Mr. Pello was saying, I mean, in general, yeah, in terms of American families, it seems like parental estrangement is on like a kind of on the rise. It's kind of gone up from articles that I've seen because, the models of what makes the models of child parental relationships that children have with their parents even as adults have kind of changed as to what they expect, and it's kind of more of a happiness model as opposed to more of like obligation. Like, there's a certain expectation of like, you know I guess, like,
Being
okay, you're
friends
my
with the
kid,
children,
then hello.
being friends with the child.
Yeah, there's, like, this expectation of, like, you have to be friends, you have to be on the same level, you have to make each other happy, right? But, I like, it's interesting, so, like, my mom has this idea that we should have been best friends. My dad never had that. He never had that thought in his head, like, if he wanted me to do something, he would tell me to do it, and I understood that relationship, and we are actually, as adults, I'm closer to my dad than I am to my mom because it kind of my mom, it always felt like, she felt insulted that we weren't best friends, just like the fact that we're different people. Like, yeah, if we were complete strangers, we probably wouldn't be friends because we're different people, we have different interests. I mean, and probably we are similar in certain ways that would make us somewhat incompatible as friends too, right? But that there is that factor, and this paper I read didn't even delineate. It didn't wasn't race specific, so I'm thinking that it probably is kind of across the board in modern U.S. society.
I definitely agree with that. Being a middle school teacher, I see that all the time with the parents wanting to be their children's friend instead of the responsible individual that gives them guidance. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, and so I think that like having even like so even having that expectations, and so like if a parent has those expectations of a child and a child has like issues, like problems that they're going through, like you can't really expect to have like, I don't know, like the author like, kind of like when you're a child, like you have your parent is your authority and kind of tell you no nonsense um advice, or like even to the point where it's like, oh no, like this guy, he doesn't like me and his friends made fun of me, and it's like, you're still in school, like just don't bother about it. Like you have to have that perspective, but like, sometimes, people want to be like, oh, like does like, because my mom was like, oh, does he like you, does that person like you, oh, you should, my mom wanted me to be popular, and that was like
Hey, Chloe.
made no sense to me. Mhm.
I didn't catch all of it. Your mother was white and your father was black?
No, my both my parents are black.
Okay. Because
No.
oddly enough, I uh with my son, I kind of have a parallel story to yours. Um, I'm black and his mother was white. She died some years ago, sadly enough, but
Sorry to hear
um,
that.
I was sorry to experience it, but we've gotten where we are. But I used to go through the same thing. Is it a black and white thing, or is it a man and woman thing? Is it a background thing? Tell me about your father and your mother, their backgrounds. And I know I'm hijacking, but I'm rather curious. Was your father more, was he military?
Kind of
If
derailing the topic.
I'm
um
sorry.
Kind of derailing the topic to go into a personal life. Like that's kind of weird.
Okay, fine.
well,
And
I mean,
okay,
it's fun actually, because the thing is, the reason why I really wanted to join this conversation and I wanted to talk about complex PTSD, it was actually because of my mother, right? And so I will go into the background. Well, I guess my parents' background, because, my mother was born in Louisiana in the 1950s, so definitely lived through Jim Crow, and really like, honestly, I don't know how I'm alive today, because there are so many times my mother should have been like dead, right? The amount of, let's want to say complex PTSD, because she has had so many traumas, one after the other, throughout the years, that has affected how she interacts with the world. And it does affect, in terms of memory, and it affects people in terms of how they perceive the world. And so that was kind of like the biggest conflict between the two of us, because my mother, she's very, very, very sensitive to any racial issue of, like, are they saying this because my child is black? Like, if a teacher ever said, like, oh, we're having this issue with your child, and my mother is very quick to be like, oh, like, it might be racism. And then, like my brother, he had like in-school suspension, right, for I think plagiarism. And she was very quick. And then you ask my brother, he's like, yeah, I didn't cite my sources. So it was kind of true. He did violate the rules. But my mother, she's very, very sensitive about that type of stuff. But for my dad, he was in Texas, but like so my mom, she integrated. She was like, the first wave of integrated like students in the school system. She had a horrible, horrible time with that. And then my dad, he was in an all black school all the way from elementary school to high school. He had a great time, right? And so,
I'm getting out for this call right now.
okay.
Oops, sorry about that. I wasn't talking to you. Sorry. Great, that's a good story.
Oh,
Sorry.
all right. I wish I could talk to more to you. I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Let me just say, I'm so intrigued about hearing about that whole situation, about what you were saying. Your mother was so well, paranoid. I don't know if that's the word to describe it.
Yeah, she was very, very sensitive. And the thing is, I grew up in Alaska. My brother was born in Alaska, and so, like, in terms of the black population, it's less than 3%. And that is including military families. So, like, one, there's not that many people up in Alaska, period. And then two, it's just, the two highest populations up there are, of course, there are white people up there, and then there are the natives that are there. And so, there really aren't even enough black people there for there, like, to be any kind of like anything that's systemic, right? Actually, there's more things that were against the natives. There's more racism towards the natives than anything that I saw in general. But my mother was still hyper, hyper sensitive. And so you take, living in, like, there's many different cultures across the United States. And in Alaska, I would not say that there's really anti-black racism there that's like prevalent enough to be noteworthy at all, or even to necessarily affect people's lives in the ways of more impoverished areas in the contiguous in the United States. But my mom still was very, very sensitive. And so so in my perspective, I wonder how much of some reactions in terms of the rest of the contiguous United States, in terms of trauma, is kind of compounding trauma. Because I know someone else, like, this person's a white person, right, who has, um, you know, those symptoms of complex PTSD, and any little thing could kind of, um, it could it's like something could be slight, but it becomes a very big emotional thing. And so sometimes I don't necessarily think that it's productive to have a conversation about trauma in terms of, is the trauma legitimate or not, based off of if the source is legitimate or not. If you perceive something to be real, you are going to be traumatized by it, right? Even if you find out later on it really wasn't real, it still massively affects you, and how your physical response, and it can really derail your life in negative ways. And make you avoidant of certain behaviors, make you avoidant of your children participating in certain things, right? Like I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers. I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers because my mother had a fear that the family I would go over to their house, they're going to be racist and they're going to try to pin a crime on me. And then my parents wouldn't have people over to my house because she was afraid that us if I invited a person over that they would lie and claim that my dad molested them and therefore try to pin a crime on him. And you know, I would have liked to think that my mother had at least a little bit of faith in me that I wouldn't really associate with people that were that lying and scheming. And like, you know, if I invite someone over to my house to sleep over, we're pretty good friends, right? And but she it's not that she didn't trust me, but her paranoia was that high because she had seen it in her life. You know, I'm never going to say that like what my mom went through was ever illegitimate and that it's a learned behavior. She learned to look for, out for things, but when that risk went away, and so I think that's what the arguments are of, you know, if there is a kind of, you know, white supremacy isn't playing in a certain situation, people are primed to that's their go-to. And because that's what they've learned to look for and that's what they've learned to associate it with, and it's traumatizing. And so I think, you know, there needs to be a way of people figuring out how to parse the two, or like how to figure out how much of one and how much of the other, how much of this a legitimate situation in which this is racism, and figure out how to address that component, but how much of it is, or at least even of like a public outcry or even like of a personal reaction to it, is it how much of am I feeding into it? Because I don't think it's one or the other. It has to be a combination of the two. There are very few situations that I've seen that it's absolutely 100% one side or the other. It's always a combination.
Okay, I have a question for you, Chloe. Um, you just described the things that your mother went through, and they're not pleasant things, and she was traumatized by it. So I believe that you don't share her fears, right? You don't share her deep suspicion of everything in terms of racial terms. You don't share that, right?
Correct.
How did you manage that situation? How did you manage to not get influenced by that? I mean, she raised you, so you could just easily pick up those traits and see a racism where might not necessarily be racism. How did um, draw the line? What exactly did you do?
I had to explore the world for myself, really, and just wait and see. It's a lot of wait and see, right? So, a lot of what my mom said did influence me. But then there had to be like little things where it was actually more convenient not to follow her advice. And so I was like, yeah, maybe I won't do that. So one thing she always told me to do was, even if you have a very, very little thing, when you go into a store, always ask for a bag, right? If you have, like, let's say I
Mm.
bought one pencil, and I should, if I check out at the store, ask for a bag so they don't accuse me of shoplifting. So, for the longest time, I had a bunch of plastic bags for very little trivial things. But then, you know, after a while, it's like, okay, you know, I understand shoplifting happens. How about I just say no to the bag and I just carry the receipt with the thing, and that worked, right? And you know, that's the thing that I do now. So like my mom, you know, it's like little stuff like that, right? Or, you know, saying like, oh, that person is probably, you know, they're like this, blah, 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 blah. You know, I keep that in my head, but then I basically wait and see if any of that is confirmed, right? So like I've worked in retail in college, right? Like a lot of people have done. And there have been like a young couple that look like a pair of skinheads. Like they look like they are, you know, all tattooed up, white blonde. And so I'm like, oh man, what if these people are neo Nazis, right? What if these people are neo Nazis and I have to interact with them? But I still do it. I wait and see, and I interact with them. They're very pleasant. They're very nice. They're very polite. actually they actually defy the stereotype of people with tattoos, really, honestly. And so, like, okay, I guess I was wrong. And the thing is, I have to note when I'm wrong about an assumption and then kind of readjust what I do in the future. And like, it's not like I'm going to go out of my way to like, like, oh, maybe this guy offering free ice cream is totally legit. I'm going to jump in the van, right? I'm not going to do something like that, but do stuff that's reasonable. It's kind of like I forgot. It's like kind of like I've heard this type of thing described as like Bayesian thinking, right? You have to note like for Bayesian logic kind of to work, you have to recognize when your model of a situation is wrong and then adjust. And then kind of you keep adjusting until you find that your model is reasonably robust as to how the situation is going to work out, and that's what you stick with,
Hey,
you know?
Chloe, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do black men uh, ha- do black men hunt in Alaska, or do they fish more? And
Oh,
Really?
don't that's actually a thing.
wait, can you repeat that? Your sentence, part of your sentence cut out
Do
for a
Black
black
second.
men
men
hunt in Alaska?
Oh,
or fish more. Wh- I'm personally a fisherman. I can point a rifle, and then
mhm.
after you answer, Bo, I'd like to ask a question to you. Can we arrange that?
Man, what's the question, yo?
Uh, Chloe, can you please finish?
Okay. Yeah. So, I have it like specifically black men. My dad, he's not really.
Actually, have you hunted?
Well, so I've gone skeet shooting. So I have
Oh
shot a
no!
gun.
Oh,
Um,
that is hard. On skis?
no, skeet shooting, skeet. I haven't done it on skis. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. You're
So,
shooting in the air.
yeah, yeah, with the little
Okay,
plate.
guys.
Clay,
I want us
Clay,
to wrap
Clay.
this.
Yeah.
Stanley. Um,
Mhm.
this is almost 3 hours into the conversation. So in the next 10, 15 minutes, I want us to wrap up the conversation. So let's just circle back to you know, trauma in the Black community. You know, uh,
Okay. Well,
the
I
case
have
that
tried to ignore um, Bo's uh, comments, and mostly I agree with him. This is one time, and Chloe, hopefully we can talk one of these days because I'm fascinated about Alaska. But Bo Diddley, I simply agree with you wholeheartedly. What I think I
okay.
heard you say is hug your children tighter, raise them better. Or am I wrong?
Is
Um,
that to go?
my son has a white mother and a black father, and I'm from the deep, deep South, Savannah, Georgia. So I know um, how overcoming stuff. I also um, did a Charles thing. Uh, I didn't have to overcome anything. I was there because my father was a policeman, which is a hot topic, but he was also a extremely level-headed person. He um is retired now. Um I don't see racism as like acid, but I do see it as bad milk. Best thing I can come up with. I think your solution, hug your kids and raise them well. Thomas Sowell is right about that part. I
Thank
agree.
you very much, Stanley. So, Mr. Pelu, let's hear from you. How do we deal with the trauma in the Black community? How can we, you know, heal, come to a point of healing, and then be able to move on? Okay, Bo, you can go ahead since Mr. Pelu is still.
I think we need
Hello,
to
hello.
unplug.
I can't really hear you. Anyway,
We need,
I heard you say Mr. Pelu, but I can't really hear too much because I'm going down the subway. So let me make my closing arguments now because I'm about to be on the subway and I'm gonna be hearing anything you said. But yeah, yeah.
Okay.
As for trauma and PTSD in every community, whether black, white, I think I mean in the short term we need to find ways, but it's a lot of or in the long term, the only thing that can really help it is counseling and families. People need experience, like how we talking now. We're building up experience, and these are the kind of things that we need to share. Even if it's not your own personal kids, even your nieces, nephews, counsel everybody. Talk to people. We need to learn how to talk, have good manners, and that's the only way we heal because not everything is supposed to be done professionally. Some things is just a lot more subtle ways might be better. Anyway, thank you. Peace out.
Thank you,
Some
Mr.
of it,
Pelu. So, Bo, go ahead.
right.
there
So
is
I think we
nothing.
let me just make this statement so I get
Stanley,
up out of here.
let's Bo go ahead.
Yeah, I think we need to unplug, right? Because a lot of these what I'm seeing in mental health now with the trauma is that we're unplugging. Like even with Chloe's situation, I believe it was the fact that she was able to live her life and be and interacting where she was able to differentiate her mother's experiences with, you know what I mean, her real world experiences. Whereas I think now we're living in an era where everybody is so consumed with social media and depending what rabbit hole on social media you fall down, you'll become inundated with certain, bombarded with certain messages, right? That compounded with the experiences of maybe her mother or past traumas of people around us that they live, we'll turn that into our realities, which is why you see people now who's so caught up on white supremacy and systematic oppression. It's not because they lived through systematic oppression, it's because they're reliving the stories of maybe their parents or what they watch on TV. They seen the movie Roots one too many times or whatever it may be. So I think just unplugging and getting back into the real world and living and allowing that to shape your everyday experiences instead of social media and just MSNBC and what they tell you on TV. I think that'll like help with a lot of this because a lot of the stuff I see around the trauma, as you talk about, like in America right now with black people, a lot of it comes back to social media and just being bombarded with certain imagery, you know, where it makes it kind of like make you, it can almost turn you like paranoid schizophrenic in some way. But yeah, man, I just ended like that and good show. I appreciated topic and can't wait till the next one.
Thanks, Bo.
All
Thanks. I really appreciate, always appreciate your insights. So, Chloe,
right, all right.
over to you.
Hi. Although I haven't been here for most of the conversation, I was listening. I tried to listen to most of the conversation,
Yeah.
and I do, putting aside of whether the um, the ferocity of the validity of white supremacy, but or systematic racism and all that kind of stuff, we still have to manage our own lives and the reality that we live in. And I mean, Bo is right. I did unplug. I mean, I don't have a social media account. And I realized very early on that, there are a lot of different places that are seeking to get an emotional, like the emotional reaction from you because that increases engagement and that increases revenue. And so I am very suspicious of a lot of news outlets furthering some like over emphasizing certain claims because it's like, oh, there's an increase in that, but you're basically saying the same few videos circulated over and over again,
Mm.
or they show videos that are like a few years old, when people are unhappy with police, Suddenly, they now show a video of a police car flipping a pregnant woman's car because she didn't pull over quick enough, and but that turns out that video is from 2 years ago. But it's being spread around now, and so I would question a lot of things. I would, you know, question, you know, not like question your own reality, but like question yourself if you are perceiving a situation in the same way that you believe it is being, if you're being accurate in your perception of it. I think I remember someone earlier in the conversation, or not the conversation, but in the comments, we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that everyone, regardless of race or whatever, socioeconomic status, needs to kind of practice those things. Mindfulness, trying to see if you're wrong about certain things and trying to correct yourself so that you are actually modeling the world as closely as it is so that you can most effectively move through the world. So,
Thank you very much, Chloe. I just saw that Kevin B. Black came in now. So, Kevin, let me just let you in. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Let me get the link for Kevin B. Black so that he can say something. Then we end the conversation here. So, Kevin, so that's the link. Call in. Call in. 2 minutes, then we end the conversation. So thank you very much, Chloe, for your voice, as usual. I mean, every time I come here to talk with you guys, I pick one or two things, and I get smarter. You know, I like listening to people who are way smarter than myself, and I think I found a whole lot of you. So Kevin is in the house. Kevin, how you doing?
Hey, good night, or good afternoon, or good morning. I'm doing pretty well, man. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. So we've been talking about trauma in the Black community and how to deal with the trauma that Black people have experienced or are experiencing right now, and how dealing with that trauma can be beneficial for us and help us better than dwelling in things that are going to keep us down. So 2 minutes, just tell us your mind, and we'll end the conversation.
Trauma in the black community. I wish I could have been here earlier to hear everyone's perspective,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
context the trauma was being defined. So I'm not sure which angle to go out from here.
Okay. What I'm looking at trauma in respect to as it relates to the race conversation. Understand? As it relates to how Black people have been treated, or the way they perceive they have been treated, and how much it contributes to emotional distress in the Black community, and how we can move past that so that we were more productive. So that's the angle.
The The truth is, in my opinion, that once discrimination exists, any form of discrimination, whether it be on class, sex, religion, race, any form of discrimination, once they exist, there will always be trauma. So my solution is we encourage people to how people can behave in a system that they seems to be oppressive, and also how you can challenge that system and make that system more equitable for everyone. Once I'm just of the opinion that once inequality exists, there will always be trauma, and that is call in my opinion for more activism, advocating, and more analysis, I guess, of what's going on. That's just my opinion.
Right. So thank you very much, Kevin. We missed your voice. You're
Mhm.
always early, but it seems you had some other things to do today. So thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Jeff.
Can you
Thank
start the
you,
stream like a
Rodriguez.
hour later than you started it today?
If I started an hour later, that would be 11 p.m. my time, and I need to catch some sleep.
Okay
So
then.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
Charles is a
thank you.
lazy genius. He needs sleep.
I need sleep. Of course, I do need sleep.
Hey, Charles,
Thank you,
um,
Adams.
this
Yeah.
this is you're gonna be great if you keep going this way. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Christian. Thank you all for coming to this conversation today. We've had a wonderful time. And I believe that we've been able to take one or two things back that would improve our relationship with people and improve our mental health and help us cope more with, whatever stress is associated with being Black. So until next time, guys, have a great day, have a great morning, have a great afternoon, have a great evening, and have a great night. So see you guys in another live stream. Bye.
Okay, bye. Hopefully the stream is like tomorrow or Sunday, and those are my day off.
Okay, okay, okay. Tomorrow Sunday. So maybe we can do a Sunday.